have a couple of introductions that we want to make before we kick off the panel. And the first person that I'm going to introduce really needs no introduction. He is well known across all of northern San Diego County, although he is also known in San Diego County. He serves on so many committees, everything from housing to land use. He is just beloved in northern San Diego County. And recently, he was reelected to his sixth and final term, quite a feat, to the County Board of Supervisors. And this year, he is chairman of the County Board of Supervisors. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill Horn.
Well, good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. This is the 31st annual County Economic Roundtable that we've held, and I want to thank you all for attending. I don't know that I have any wisdom. A couple of times ago when I did this and somebody introduced IT, I lost $500,000 when it all dropped, so be careful whose advice you're taking over here. Anyway, the Economic Roundtable continues to be one of the longest running local economic forecast events in this region, and all of us investors like to know what's going to be next. Usually we're about a year late when we find that out. But anyway, this kicking off this year with insight and analysis, the future of our local economy. I think my instinct this year is going to be, it promises to be a very good year. That's what I think. So, but you can listen to them and they'll tell you what the truth is. For almost 3 decades, the county and our partners, the Workforce Partnership, USD School of Business, and the UT of San Diego have worked to bring together economists, industrial experts, business leaders, and others to inform us and to educate us as we all search for opportunities, and we look forward to hearing the thoughts of our current panelists. I've heard a few of them on a monthly basis, some of them. I don't know how true they are, but anyway, as a former, well, I'm still a real estate broker, but I own mainly apartment houses. I always want to know what the economy is, and the problem is the biggest indicator I get is out of my laundry machines. Tells me whether or not people can afford to do their laundry. So it was a good year last year. It looks like it's going to be better this year. So I look forward to the insight that they have. They have much better records than me. I've been in the real estate business, apartment business for 42 years. I've never sold a thing. If I want something new, I just refinance and buy it. So it's better to do that than give the government your money. So anyway, I hope we get a lot of insight here. We at the county, of course, as you know, may or may not know, 1995 we're facing bankruptcy, and we turned that around by selling the trash system in 1997 and paying off all the bonds, $206 million worth of bonds. And so we've enjoyed very good AAA finance rating for a number of years, 15 years in a row. We happen to be currently one of 9 counties in the United States that maintain that AAA bond rating. So as far as the government goes, or at least our form of government, we continue to do more with less, where even when times are good, we plan for bad times, and we hope they don't ever show up. But that's our philosophy, and the current board, who's been around a while, 20 years for almost most of us, we try to educate the new guy into that mentality. So we don't like to overspend. We never spend one-time money on ongoing programs. We have maintained that for over 20 years. So I really want to thank the partners that we have for hosting this today. I think this is an important event. As a longtime real estate broker in San Diego County and other areas of Southern California, I always like the insight and hope we can figure it out. Lately I've ventured into the hotel business. I bought a hotel in Solvang, so you can come visit if you'd like. Anyway, I'm hoping that's going to work. I had to do it outside of San Diego County, otherwise I had to do all these reports. Anyway, I would like to thank you all for being here, and finally, the University of San Diego School of Business Administration for once again welcoming us to this magnificent campus, terrific venue here, and I thank you for the parking space too, and I hope you enjoy the 31st Economic Roundtable, and I'm introducing Mansur Rahman. Did I do that right? I hope. I apologize. Associate Dean of Outstanding School of Business here at the university.
Sorry, it's a hard one. Again, thank you, Chairman Horn. And by the way, congratulations on getting reelected as the chair. I'm sure that is both a joy and maybe a condolence as well. Good morning, and first of all, I want to extend a warm USD welcome to everyone, and especially those visitors to our fair campus. I've been here 24 years, I was telling Peter earlier, and right now where we're standing was the rugby field. We used to go jogging around this track here, and the USD has grown tremendously over this time, but I think we'll always maintain that charm that always wins over our visitors here. So welcome, everyone. Glad to see you here. I also want to thank, again, our fellow sponsors, the county, UT San Diego Workforce Partnership, working with us to bring this first-rate panel. Proud to note that my colleague Ryan Ratcliffe and I think our alum Alex Beaton is part of that. So to hear about the forecast of San Diego's economy for 2015 and beyond. I hear things are looking up, at least nationally, and which is a good thing. I'm actually on my other job. I'm an international finance professor here, so the rest of the world's not looking that hot. So I think for us to have a good story is really important. And going by the high bids I'm getting for this addition remodel project, I think I'm kind of feeling it too. But after these last 6 years, I think we could certainly use some healthy and sustained period of growth in here, and as well, as I said, for the rest of the world. We here at the School of Business are certainly doing our part to sustain the growth, educating about 1,700 undergraduates majoring in all the key business disciplines, and about 500 graduate students in 6 specialized master's programs and the MBA degree here. As you may know, well, I'm going to assume you don't know, so I'm going to get to say this. Our undergraduate program has consistently been ranked in the top 50, our part-time MBA program in the top 20, and just this last week, our MS in supply chain was ranked in the top 10 for online graduate business programs in the nation. So if any of you, I see a few gray hairs, I did a graduate degree a few years ago myself, are thinking to do an advanced degree, or even if you're thinking about hiring someone, I certainly welcome you and encourage you to look into our various programs offerings. Of course, the UT San Diego is also a great promoter of economic growth in our region. So I'm delighted to welcome Jeff Light, the editor of the UT San Diego, and I understand soon to be the new president as well of UT San Diego. Congratulations, to come up and say a few words. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Excuse me. I'm really delighted to be a sponsor of this event. I think the UT is probably the metropolitan newspaper with the greatest number of economists writing in its columns, many of these guys. It's sort of a point of pride. It's something that Diana and Roger and I put together 4 or 5 years ago. Now, last year, we added CEOs to that mix because I found after a few years I started getting these whispers from people in the business community. You guys might, I don't know if you know this, they would say, oh, those economists don't know what. You might as well throw a dart and listen to an economist. You know, maybe the CEOs weren't the best business students or don't have the greatest memories of business school. Certainly I enjoyed business school. So we added CEOs, and part of this, every year, we also ask for a forecast from our panelists. And at the end of the year, Roger goes back and looks to see how they did. And the results at this first year of the competition were that the economists were within 15% of the actual values of the aggregate I think we asked about unemployment for U.S. and San Diego, GDP growth, and the Dow number. I think there might be one other number in there. So which I thought was a pretty good number. And the CEOs were within 16% of the actual value. So the economists won. And more interestingly, when I looked back, the previous year, the economists were only within 33% of the actual value. So I think the competition has done everybody good. And I'm looking forward to hearing your sharpened minds today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter Kellstrom, the Workforce Partnership CEO. Peter, come on up. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Happy Friday, TGIF. It is an honor for us to partner every year with the county, UT San Diego, and USD on this event each year. The Workforce Partnership funds job training programs and conducts labor market research in order to best align training opportunities for the workers that we support and the employment community in order to meet the skills that they demand. Just last year, we celebrated our 40th anniversary of service in our region, which is an enormous milestone, and so proud of the work that's been done over those years. And I do want to recognize my colleague and predecessor, Mark Cafferty, who spent, was it 10 years there, Mark? 11 years, and saw us through some really challenging times during that time, and the Great Recession, the impact in 2008, and one sec. And to navigate some really tough times. So thank you, Mark, for all that you did in order to see us through that time. So we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Mark and the great team that has done such tremendous work to serve so many people in our region over the years. With 1.6 million people in our regional workforce, it is important for us to continuously review the state of the economy. Last October, our research team and the San Diego and Imperial Counties Community Colleges Association, or SEDICA, released 5 concurrent reports analyzing priority sectors that we determined to be vital to the regional economy, experiencing rapid growth and projecting skill shortages. The 5 sectors were healthcare, life sciences, advanced manufacturing, clean energy, and information and communication technologies. And obviously there are many more sectors that are very dynamic in our region. The maritime industry is huge, sports and active lifestyle, and one other that has 100 local startups in just the last number of years. Can anybody name that, that sector? Starts with a B, and it's really delicious. Beer. So it's been an enormous growth industry and much more to come. We won't be talking about that perhaps today, but another vital industry. Also huge news last July, the President signed into law the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. The importance of passing this act cannot be overstated, as it provides the framework and funding necessary to ensure that we are able to support our nation's workforce. Nationally, 20 million people access workforce services. It's an incredible impact. Locally, our 12 America's Job Centers serve over 14,000 people who go through our 12 locations, and that's foot traffic of close to 250,000 people in our region alone. Going forward, we have many priorities and thousands of people to serve. We are encouraged by the economic recovery, but know that many people are still unemployed or underemployed. Together, we also need to solve the crisis of extremely high youth unemployment. If you are looking for a new career, a new skill set, or just need to prepare for the next step in your career path, we are here to support you, to provide training and help you to get back to work. Our call to action, employers, hire young adults this coming summer. We will be kicking off Connect to Careers soon. That's our summer youth employment program that has been largely funded by the city in the last couple of years. Also consider the America's Job Centers as your resource for skilled and motivated workers. For more information, we have the easiest website to address, or address to remember, and that's workforce.org. Thank you for being here and participating in this important discussion today. Thank you.
Okay, so this is how this works. Each of the guests, they get to speak for 15 minutes, and they're going to be timing some of you. I'm looking over at you. You know who I'm looking at. So please hold your questions until the end, because we will have a Q&A period. And if you didn't, when you came in, there were packets, and I think there were pieces of paper. What they tend to do is you guys write your questions down. We're highly technical here. And then they ferry them up to me and Roger, and we kind of look through them and get the questions to the panelists. So if you didn't get that, we'll take any kind of piece of paper. It doesn't have to be the blue cards that they usually give them to us at. And then if you forget or you want to replay, you know, the burning questions that we're going to be discussing today, like, am I going to get a raise this year? Or what's going to happen with Europe? Are they going to drag the U.S. economy down? All that information is right over my head. You can get those presentations at the county website, and they're also going to be replayed at countynewscenter.com. So all of that hopefully is like right over my head, and there's not a giant smiley face there instead. But let's get this thing going. Roger Scholey, my colleague who covers growth and development and all things history, historical about San Diego County, is going to introduce our panelists for us. Roger.
Thank you, Diana, and good morning to all of you. Our first panel has three members. Ryan Ratcliffe, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of San Diego. He's going to give us the big picture, the macroeconomic view of San Diego and the world, maybe even the universe. Following him is Marnie Cox, the Chief Economist at San Diego Association of Governments, who's going to focus on the regional economic outlook. And finally, Mark Cafferty, who've met already, the President and CEO of the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation, talking about investment opportunities and other great things ahead. So Ryan, come on up.
Okay. Good morning. As the leadoff hitter, I feel my role is to kind of give you a little bit of an appetizer and preview of a lot of the themes that I think are going to come up over the course of the day. So with that in mind, I've got about 5 or 6 thoughts about the recovery. So rather than just narrate the current unemployment rate is 5.8% discussion, I want to dig a little bit behind some of the numbers to see some of the themes that I think have really kind of been driving what we've seen in the last couple of years. So I do want to start out not quite at the universe perspective, but at least comparing. A lot of what I want to do is going to compare an aspect of the recovery in the U.S. to what we've seen in California and in San Diego specifically. So the first panel on the left is just kind of the single, if you force me to look at one number, this would be it. Real GDP, the way I've put this graph together is just to normalize 2009 being when GDP kind of bottomed out after the Great Recession. And I've done it this way so that we can kind of compare the recoveries, right? If you just read off that, oh, okay, that black line looks like it's about 108, that's the US GDP is 8% higher than it was at the bottom of the Great Recession. So I think the GDP slide really shows to me 2 things. First, if you look 2005, 6, 7, you see that California especially, but San Diego kind of in between, had experienced a bigger run-up to the recession. I mean, we all sort of remember that was the boom period. So you can see that that meant that the decline in GDP that California and San Diego experienced was, of course, bigger than what we saw in the nation as a whole. I think 2009, 2010 are really the key thing to focus on in the GDP picture, because what we see is that the U.S. economy started growing slowly right after 2009, but it took California and especially San Diego a little bit longer to get off the mat, and I think that's driven largely by our increased exposure to real estate, the source of the bust. What we've seen more recently, though, is that California and San Diego's growth rates, we haven't quite climbed out of the hole, so we haven't caught up with the black line, but if you notice, they're essentially parallel. So I think the last couple of years in terms of overall GDP, we're seeing that the local economy is tracking the broader national numbers. That's not necessarily true on the jobs picture, though, which is the second panel here. You see the same themes of California and San Diego having a bigger run-up in employment, followed by a bigger bust. But I think the thing that I really am encouraged by is 2010, 2011, all of the national, state, and local economies all growing at about the same rate, but we really see San Diego and California take off about the end of 2011. And so in terms of job growth, I think the California and San Diego have significantly outperformed the national average. So this is sort of, I think, consistent with kind of what you hear normally, that the job market's been terrible for a long time, but it seems like it's finally starting to pick up some momentum, especially when you look a little bit closer to home. So that's the glass half full perspective on the job market. I think one thing that, whether you look at non-farm payroll employment growth or just the raw unemployment number, that gets masked here is shown in the first slide on this picture, which is just, I'm trying to abstract away from, the unemployment number has a problem that it's crucially dependent on whether somebody is actively looking for a job or not, what we economists call labor force participation. One of the real things that we've never seen before, at least at this scale, that occurred during the Great Recession was a collapse in labor force participation. A lot of people just decided it's too hard to get a job and I'm going to try and do something else, whether that is go back and get a further degree, or I'm going to maybe try to start my own business. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in this number, but we can see that labor force participation is back where it was in 1983 in this picture, which is really remarkable, and it's unprecedented in the last 35 years of economic history. So you can see, I don't have the number for San Diego. It's a little bit tougher to unearth that one, so I just have the US and California here. But you can see that California, this number started to rise again, where in the US it's essentially stayed flat. So people are coming back into the California labor force at a little bit stronger clip than they are in the US as a whole. But I think one thing here, when you start to feel good about unemployment, one of the issues is there's a whole bunch of people that 6, 7 years ago were in the labor force with a job that aren't now. And on the right here, I try to unpack a little bit more of that. I mean, this is sort of hits close to home for me, since my primary line of business is the production of 21-year-old entrants to the labor force, I guess you might say. So I'm trying to unpack this number. This is for the US as a whole. How has this employment to population ratio changed? Just breaking it up into age groups here. So it got cut off a little bit at the bottom, but you can see on the left is kind of the 16 to 17-year-old crowd. At the very far end, we go all the way up to a category that's 75 and above. And the two big stories here, I think, are that you've seen a significant decline in labor force participation in the 20 to 30 category. I think this is one of the great tragedies of the Great Recession, is the recent college graduates have had really, really tough sledding. Anecdotally, I feel like that's improving, watching the students that I see graduating from USD going out and getting jobs. But I think this is still one of the big, so we're not really talking about, you can see that there's a small decline in sort of the 35 to 40, 40 to 45 category, but one of the big casualties of this has been recent college graduates. The other real feature of this, I think, is that all the positive bars out there in the 60 to 65, 65 to 70, we're seeing a lot of sort of the first wave of baby boomer retirements getting pushed back a little bit. Just, I can't afford to retire right now. I'm lucky enough to still have a job, but my retirement, the stock market decline kind of wiped out, or at least significantly reduced my nest egg, so I got to end up working longer. But the good news is my life expectancy is longer too. So, but I think the demographic, one of the things here, the demographics of what's going on with the labor force are something that is often kind of missed in our discussion about the improvement in the labor force. All of these trends are improving, but I think getting the labor force back, I mean, I don't know that it's going to recover back up to where it was in 2004, because this is in part driven by long-run demographics with retiring baby boomers, but getting college graduates back out into the labor force sooner, I think, is one of the key issues that we continue to face. So there's also been a little bit of a disconnect, I think. You know, a lot of stories that I would hear about, you know, 2010, 2011 is just that, well, we used to have 6 people in that department, now we've got 2. But we're still managing to do roughly about the same amount of work we were before. I'm just cracking the whip a lot harder on those 2 people who still have a job. So what I want to do is kind of explore a little bit that connection between fewer workers generating roughly the same amount of output. So this is a connection between productivity and job growth. By far and away, the best numbers we have for looking at that come from the manufacturing sector. So I'm going to concentrate on that, largely because this is the classic look for your keys under the street lamp problem in economics. You got to go where the data is to really understand this, but I think these are indicative of trends we see outside of manufacturing as well. Okay, so the graph here is of 3 things. I want to start out with the green line, which is just hours worked in manufacturing. If you think this is roughly the same thing as employment in manufacturing, we see a very similar trend, right? Flat through 2000, falls down and stays flat in 2005, falls down and stays flat again coming out of the Great Recession. Manufacturing hours worked in the US economy just either are flat or falling and have been for a couple of decades here, and they're down about 32%, slightly more in California. The interesting thing, though, is when you compare that to the blue line, you would think, well, if we're working less, we're probably making less too, and that actually has not been the case. So in the first period where manufacturing hours were flat, we see that that blue line is actually increasing. So this is showing us that we're making more output with the same number of hours, right? We're more productive. We see a slightly different version of that same trend here starting in 2000, which is hours are going down, but output is staying roughly constant, right? So all of this is indicating to us what we see in the red line, which is that in manufacturing, labor productivity has doubled since 1990, right? What the manufacturing sector in the US has gotten very good at doing is making the same amount of output with fewer people, or more output with the same number of people, depending on how you want to look at it. So I want to unpack that a little bit. Why are our workers more productive than they used to be? So this is a dive into a very obscure database that the BEA puts out called CLEMS. Why it's called CLEMS, I won't bother to tell you, but it gives us a little bit of insight into what's going on with this productivity trend. This is one of those slides I could probably spend 30 minutes on, and I'm going to spend about 3 minutes on. So the punchline of this, I think, is there's really 2 trends. So the first is US manufacturing has become more capital intensive, I think driven by 2 things. Steadily falling long-term interest rates. That governs how, what your borrowing costs are to expand your tools, equipment, and facilities. So it's cheap to invest. And so we're seeing people buy a lot of the things that's become cheaper, right? International competition, we've got a lot of other economies out there that have lots of labor and not much capital. So labor is starting to look a little bit more expensive relative to what we can get overseas. But the other thing, the black line here, is just the leftover category. When we account for more capital, more energy, more materials, all of that stuff, we still just seem to have become a lot more efficient. More output out of the same amount of inputs, not just labor, but everything. And so this is both very good from the perspective of profits and output, right, productivity. But at the same time, it does, I think it is one of the things that's underneath our trend of why isn't employment growing as fast coming out of the recession as it may have been in the past? Well, one of the things is we've seen a lot of things that are just driving productivity. That discussion is very naturally connected to wages. I'm going to sort of slide around just with an introduction to this rather than, again, this is a topic that probably deserves 45 minutes in and of itself here. But what I want to do here, we're going to hear a lot more about this in a minute, but this is just in California and San Diego, what different sectors have been the major engines of the recovery here. The way I've ranked it is for California, which is the blue bar. Construction has seen the highest percentage growth, largely because it saw one of the highest percentage declines. But a big source of job growth in California has been construction. administrative services, professional technical services. So going from bottom to top has been the sources of job growth in California, and then I'm just comparing San Diego to those. So you can see San Diego to some extent lines up with what we see in California, but there's a few instances where San Diego looks a lot different. Non-durable manufacturing right at the top has been an overall decliner in California, but been a growth industry here in San Diego. The thing I want to point out is how polarized the recovery has been. So I picked, 3 of kind of the top half here that all actually belong in one category called professional businesses services. But we've got professional technical, very kind of advanced degree white collar jobs, administrative services. These are more of the support roles in your average business context, and then kind of the headquarters employment, for lack of a better term, in that management category. So we've seen a lot of job growth in that professional business services category, and on the right you can see that, not surprisingly, it's a fairly highly paid sector, averaging about $65,000 a year for your average job in that sector. In contrast, some of the other big sources of growth, construction, leisure and hospitality here in San Diego, that's really a tourism kind of driven thing, and education and healthcare, these are all jobs that are down towards the bottom of my rank of average salary per year. So we've seen a lot of job growth in high-paying sectors, and we've seen a lot of job growth in some of the lowest-paying sectors, and there's not very much in the middle, right? So you hear a lot of discussion about income distribution. I think one of the things that we see locally that, that lines up with that is just the sources of job growth are kind of at both ends. And in the home stretch here, naturally, again, being a professor, I want to connect that kind of back to education. So some context for this picture. The order that the sectors are in, here in the average annual salary sector, you can see that I've ranked them, right? Mining is at the top, leisure and hospitality in the bottom. I've preserved that ranking in this slide on the left here, which is educational requirements. So my Captain Obvious statement for the day, higher wage sectors, the ones at the top of the picture, information, finance, professional business services, typically they have higher requirements for the average job. We're talking typically 52% of people in the information sector have a bachelor's degree or above. All right, this isn't a surprise. The challenge that we have, there's sort of good news and bad news here, comparing on the right, where this is the census's most recent estimate of the share of the population. So let's take the BA plus set of bars, which is just what percentage of the population has a bachelor's degree or higher. So you can see the US average is slightly below 30%. California is a little bit higher, and one of the things that makes San Diego such a vibrant economy is we're one of the higher ones in the nation, just under 35%. We lag the Bay Area in California, but San Diego has a very highly educated, talented workforce. So, it's no surprise that one of the engines of growth has been the employment sectors that take advantage of that share of the population with this high degree of educational attainment. So on the other end, the other set of bars that I presented is the people who have a high school diploma or less in terms of educational attainment. So never went to college, not community college, not an associate degree, not anything like that. Average in the US as a whole, I think, comes out at 18%. San Diego, slightly higher, but California as a whole is one of the states in the nation that has the highest share of these maybe got through high school but never went to college as well. So I think one of the challenges we face in San Diego to some extent, but to California to a much greater degree, is this issue of there's a higher than average proportion of the workforce with high degrees of educational attainment, but there's also a significant chunk of the population with very low educational attainment. And what kind of mix of job growth is going to generate prosperity kind of across that whole spectrum, right? So I think this is kind of one of the challenges that I think we're going to hear a little bit more about as we go. So like I said, my role was setup guy. I wanted to sort of pose some interesting, provocative ideas that hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about in the presentations to come. And if you have any questions about anything I've said, especially in light of what you hear later, I'm happy to address those during the Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Now we're going to take it from the 30,000 feet up to the ground level with Marnie Cox.
Thank you, Roger, and same moment, thank you for hosting again this year. Much appreciate participating. I've divided my presentation this morning into three parts. First, a brief overview of sort of where we've been in 2014 and maybe what we expected versus what we got. And then move on. I just have a contextual slide for the US economy, but it does overlap a little bit of what Ryan was talking about. And I spend most of my time talking about San Diego. Not loud enough? Much better? Okay. I like it when you can hear me. First, in terms of what happened in 2014, when we started out 2014, maybe you all remember at least our forecast, maybe you read some financial pages in the UT. Everyone expected a fairly stable growth rate in 2014. They expected the end of quantitative easing, and they expected interest rates to fall. That was a given. Interest rate, this was a sure thing. Interest rates were going to rise. Sorry, interest rates were going to rise. And we only 1 out of 3 on those sort of large expectations. We did not have stable growth. We started the year with declining GDP, fell by 2% at the national level. Then the next quarter rose by 4%, and if that wasn't good enough, it rose by 5%. In the following quarter, no one expected that. Everybody had to change their GDP forecast by 2 full percentage points in the third quarter because everyone thought it was going to be less than it was in the second quarter. Had no idea about what's going on in the economy. Incredibly volatile. But the other thing that happened is that the Federal Reserve, as well as others, were expecting labor force to continue to expand. They thought employment would begin to tighten a little bit and wages would rise. We actually saw the opposite. So that was a very unexpected one. And of course, the falling oil prices. Again, no one had that in their forecasts. And today we're still debating whether this is good or bad. You can pick up a paper and you can read today that falling oil prices is not good. And then you can read an article 2 pages later and say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So it's very different. And the other thing that we're seeing, which is unexpected, was falling interest rates. In 2014, they started out somewhere around, say, 10-year treasuries at 3% or so. They fell to about 2%, so a 100 basis point decline today. I didn't look at the 10-year, but yesterday it was about 1.78. So interest rates are still declining in spite of the fact that the Federal Reserve says that they're going to raise interest rates this year. Don't bank on it. Now, the emerging trends that we have are just as interesting as the unexpected ones. We have accelerating growth. I think Ryan is absolutely right here. We've spinning our wheels for a long time, according to that truck he had up there, and we're beginning to see some traction. The accelerating growth, most people are expecting 3.5% growth in the fourth quarter of the year. That will make the first time in a very long time we've had 3 quarters in a row of above 3% GDP growth. So that would be great. On the other hand, in December, wages fell from the month before, and year over year, they're up about 2%. So wages are not doing well. The other couple things that are going on in terms of emerging trends, a real strong dollar emerging out there in the market, a safe haven. The U.S. is looked at as a safe haven. If you take a look at what's going on over in Europe today, interest rates are actually negative in many places. So you're giving the bank money, and they're charging you for you hanging on to your money for anywhere from 2 to 5 years. These are not just small negative interest rates. They're for long periods of time. There's clearly some problems in Europe that still need to be worked out. Negative interest rates are not normal. And the last thing is that I think in terms of emerging trends is this whole thing about inflation and whether or not we'll actually see it or we'll see continuous disinflation and perhaps even some deflation as the year moves forward. With that as background, I put into context what I think are some of the problems at the national level, just to give you an idea that we should temper our enthusiasm about what's going on today and recognize that there are some issues out there. And two of them overlap what Ryan talked about. The first one is potential GDP growth. This represents the U.S. economy growing at about the 2.2% growth rate since the end of the recession, when in reality our potential is about 3.2, 3.6%, somewhere in there. So that gap really represents the potential that we should be growing at versus where we are. And if we were growing at an average long-range growth of above 3%, we'd be adding another $1 trillion to the economy. That extra $1 trillion would go into job production, right? And unemployment rates would be lower, and hopefully wages would be higher. So it's that potential gap that's really the issue. And we're making headway in closing that, because remember, this past year, if this third quarter holds up, we'll be above 3%. So we would begin to close that gap that we've been in since the end of the recession. The next point is the unemployment. And today, unemployment in December at the U.S. level, about 5.6%, which is really good. But about half of that decline since the end of the recession has come because there's fewer people in the labor force. So job growth can take advantage of about half of that, but the rest of it is because the people have dropped out of the labor force. The surveys that they've done have showed that about a third, maybe 40% of those people who actually dropped out of the labor force were old enough to retire, didn't want to. They would like to be working today. And I think Ryan's slide up there about those who are in the older age groups who still are working are probably a little bit of proof of that, right? They would prefer to be in it. If the jobs do turn around and start to grow rapidly, you may see not only the college graduates, which Ryan is helping prepare today, but you'll also see some older people return to the labor force also. A couple other things on the unemployment side, and you can compare that part-time because of economic reasons. A lot more people who have part-time jobs today who would really like full-time jobs. And you can see long-term unemployment, longer than 7 months, still extremely high today versus what it has been in the past, and still a lot of discouraged workers. So although we've got an unemployment rate of 5.6%, when you take a look at what's called total employment, U6, we're really at about a 10, 11% unemployment rate today. And a lot of them, I think, will be difficult to provide full-time jobs to. The last one I want to mention is on the real wage side. Now, I've indexed this to 2005 moving forward, and there's really a couple points here. One, 2005 through about 2008 or so, real wages were growing in all categories. The 25% represents the lowest 25% of wages. The median is in the middle, and then the upper 75%. But somewhere around 2008 or so, a big divergence begins to occur, where we actually see a slowdown in wage growth related to the median and below, but the other group, the 25% or 75% above, continues to grow. This is that gap that Ryan was mentioning about, and so you see stagnating wages for a majority of the working, but you're seeing some increases going on, so that gap between them is expanding. Okay, let's switch over to San Diego now. The first point about total job growth, there's about 1,373,000 people that are employed in San Diego, a new high for the region overall. But more importantly than that, year over year through November of 2014, which is the last data we have, 42,000 jobs year over year were created. You have to go back to the late 1990s before you actually find that much job growth taking place. In the late 1990s, it was when a lot of our emerging growth technology companies started to come online, and a lot of growth were associated with those companies. So it's been a while, 14 plus years or so, before that has occurred. On the other hand, in the last couple of years, 13 and 14 that we have data for, the labor force. First of all, in 13, the labor force actually fell by 5,000. So we've got 30+ thousand jobs being created in 2013, and our labor force fell. That's why the unemployment rate declined. And then this year, if again, year over year through November, we've only seen about 5,000 people added to the labor force despite 42,000 jobs. So again, there's some labor force issues that still haven't been worked out in the economy. This chart overlaps what Ryan had. However, I've indexed mine to December 2007, which was the start of the recession, sort of showed what's happened since that time period. And the first chart there shows, starting in 2012, San Diego's job growth here overtook the nation. But before that, right, you can see where San Diego's peaked. It fell further than the nation, meaning it was hit harder than the recession. And for the first couple of years, we were slower coming out, right? San Diego was lagging the nation overall. But 2012, we started to lead the nation, and that's more similar to San Diego's history. We're sort of back to what our traditional role was when you looked at us versus the nation. The other one is the unemployment, again, hit harder, much harder in the recession than the nation overall, but we've made up a lot of ground, and now you can see San Diego is beginning to encroach on the U.S. level. I think we're at about 5.8% versus 5.6% at the national level. However, not all industries in San Diego have seen increases. In the 10 sort of major sectors that we see, and again going back to peak levels, there's still 5 of them that are below peak levels. And a majority of the growth has occurred in the education and health services area. Construction is still low. We peaked out somewhere around 96,000 jobs, dropped to about 58,000 today. I think we're up to about 68,000 jobs. So we still have a long ways to go just in order to get back up to where we were before the recession began. This gives you a little idea about that recession or the construction industry. The reason for it is, if you look at how much money is being spent in construction versus before the recession and after, you can see that we simply have not got back in terms of proportion of GDP expenditures in the construction sector. We lost a lot of jobs, nearly 40,000 in construction. We've gained back about a third, 11,000 or so. There's still 27,000 some odd jobs out there that have not come back. And this presents an opportunity to take a look at what's called structural unemployment as part of the problem. And remember, I said earlier about where the job growth has occurred, especially education and health services. But if you think about that's where the job opportunities are, can you actually take an unemployed construction worker, especially in light of the educational component that Ryan shared, and say, well, we'll just move them into the education and health sector? Probably not going to happen. And so there's a lot of what's called structural unemployment, changes in the economy where opportunities actually exist versus the skills and education that are necessary to take those jobs. This gets a little bit about the housing sector, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to talk really fast here. First of all, permits coming out of the recession for new houses were growing year by year. This year it looks like a little bit of a setback. Somewhere around 6,200 permits will be authorized this year. The real problem, the blue lines represent single family, red multifamily. You can see it's really the single family has never risen back up to the number of permit authorizations, and you can see that in the market today. A majority of what's being built and what's being offered are all multifamily units. We expect that to continue into the future. Sandag's forecasts are that about 80% of new homes as we move into the future will come from attached multifamily and only about 20% from single family. So a big change from history. On the taxable retail sales side, we're making progress here, growth since the end of the recession. This year we just passed about 5%, expecting similar kinds of growth. But when you break it into pieces here, we've got population growth, we've got inflation, and then you've got real growth. There's only about 1% associated with that 5% growth in taxable retail sales that's really associated with real. The rest of it is population growth and inflation. So those are the two things that are moving our taxable retail sales forward, not necessarily income growth, right, that households have and are spending more out there. Now, one of the things that I think will be talked about a little bit later is our emerging growth technology groups. And one of the sort of problematic trends that we've seen over the last 7 or 8 years is a decline in the venture capital component. And here we're down to about $750 million on an annual basis coming into the San Diego region in terms of venture capital funds. They're important because that's really the source of the funds that stimulate growth in our emerging growth technology companies. And you contrast that with how much venture capital funds is being allocated nationwide. It's rising, but our share of it is actually declining. We were in the 4 to 5%. Back in the 2006-07 area, we're down to about 2% in terms of our absorption of those venture capital funds. So it's getting smaller. So this is relatively problematic because in the past, these emerging growth technology companies, since the recession in the 1990s, have provided a lot of the fuel to get the economy back on track again, and not occurring this time around. Probably one bright spot is trade with Mexico, about almost $36 billion worth of goods cross at the Otay Mesa tract area. We're growing at over 6% compound annual growth rates over this time period, and trade there has more than doubled. So of the economy, you think about consumption and investment, government spending, and then trade. Trade is actually one of the areas in San Diego that's pushing the economy forward. In terms of overview, and just briefly maybe 2 points in light of the amount of time I have, I draw your attention to first population. And San Diego's population in the last couple of years has really begun to pick up after some relatively low rates of growth during the recession. It looks like we'll be in the 40 to 50,000 new people coming to the region here, either being born here or moving here through migration. Big turnaround from where we have been in the past. And the other one I'd point to is jobs. Jobs have been spectacularly good here in San Diego, which is part of the reason why we're seeing the migration from other parts of the world as well as other parts of the U.S. begin to pick up, and San Diego is now beginning to grow. So as background, we believe that job growth will continue. We expect sort of similar rates of growth in jobs. The 30 to 35,000 in the following year will lead to population rates of growth that we've seen. And then we also expect permits in terms of housing to be able to pick back up. San Diego's long-term forecast, we need about 12,000 permits to accommodate our growth. And as I said, this year we're down to about 6,200, so that's about half of what we need. In light of the economy doing much better, I would expect those permits to continue to build over time. And with that, let me stop and turn it over to the next panelist. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. And finally, we have Mark Cafferty.
And I think, so Marnie wasn't on our call when we rehearsed for this. And I think I owe him an apology because I said, they said, you know, some of you may go a little over, and I said Marnie will go way over. And Marnie's actually under time. So I think we're unprecedented territory here at the Economic Roundtable for at least my 14 or so years of experience being here. And it's always fun to go after guys like Ryan and Marnie because so much of our work at the EDC is basically sort of shaped by or driven by their work. The data that you just heard and that look at our economy and being able to drill in that deep and sort of really know where we have some challenges, where we have some problems, but also where we have some bright spots. I think by way of context, and can everyone hear me okay on the mic? Okay, great. I think by way of context, the big difference is I'm not an economist. An awful lot of my job comes down to promoting the economy. So I look at Roger and John Horn and our colleagues from the UT. I'm sort of their yeah, but guy. So if something's going on in the economy and Marnie says, we're really struggling and this is not, I'm sort of the guy who goes, yeah, but this is really, happening to kind of move us in the right direction. So I think that tends to be a little bit of the context you have to take into consideration when I present. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that San Diego probably hasn't done well for decades now is really project itself as the great economy and the great region that it really is on a global scale. And so an awful lot of our work over the past 3 years has been sort of getting our hands around this economy and really figuring out how to promote it in a way that would resonate and figuring out sort of where the strengths and where the growth really is so that we're not kind of saying, hey, we could be the next best at something when we know we're currently very good at something and we've got to really double down on that strategy. So I'm going to potentially go through my first several slides quickly to kind of get to the last 3 or 4, and then hoping that somebody can give me a sign if I go on too long, because I also have that, that challenge myself. But real quickly about the EDC, not to get deep into who we are as an organization, but to really kind of focus on, in the mission, economic prosperity and global competitiveness. This is really thinking about how, as a region, we continue to get to a place where the people who live here are part of that economy. So an awful lot of our work historically has been the thought about how do we bring businesses here from somewhere else? How do we convince the next Qualcomm to come to San Diego? Qualcomm didn't come to San Diego. Qualcomm grew in San Diego because of the people who came here. And so largely, you'll hear me talk an awful lot about people in the presentation. And global competitiveness. We talk a bit about the border. You know, we probably don't talk strongly enough about just how important that border is to our economy, and it's something we need to promote and take better advantage of. But also, San Diego is a gateway to the rest of the world. We've got some challenges. We have some challenges that we have a huge port, but it shares the overwhelming majority of its footprint with the largest military installation in the world. So when people look around and say, well, why doesn't it look like Long Beach? It'll never look like Long Beach unless the Navy leaves, and then we've got a whole nother economic issue or challenge that I think we don't want to face. You look at our airport, and for some of us who are flying in and out, it's a wonderful airport. It looks better and better by the day. I love that airport, and I live about 2 miles from it. But when you get into direct connections internationally, and you have a one-runway airport, the limitations become challenging for a growing economy that's really trying to target sort of the rest of the world. So I think historically, pivoting from what people have thought economic development is, or I shouldn't even say thought, people in my line of work tend to make economic development a game that looks like we're going to steal jobs from another state and get a lot of press for doing it. So we're going to go to another state and convince that people in that state that our state's better. You know, Rick Perry sends an iPhone with his personal phone number to every new business that starts in California and hits a certain growth level. I mean, those are great strategies, and they sound really good when you're running for president too. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you know, 98% of the job growth in Rick Perry's state comes from businesses that are already in his state. It's the businesses that are growing in the state. It's that entrepreneurial factor, and that story is very true in San Diego and California as well. So sort of pivoting from the idea of, you know, business attraction being what we're all about, and then a few other things, to really our work these days looking a lot more like sort of the rainbow side of the slide there, where the workforce or the talent in our region is really the driver to what's going to grow. When you even think of the great stories that, you know, over the years I've heard Marnie and others tell about the worst economic times in San Diego and then coming out of those times, an awful lot of that was beholden to the talent that was here in the region that luckily didn't leave and could sort of be either retrained or starting new sectors and taking sort of that engineering talent from one area in our innovation economy and helping to launch sort of new areas as well. So more and more we look at things like foreign direct investment. California gets more, Marnie talked about capital and the challenges that we have with venture capital, which is very real, and I think Gabby and some folks you know, are sort of tackling that issue and doing some great work and really drawing attention into the innovation that's happening in San Diego. But foreign direct investment coming into the state of California, our state blows away every other state in the country for foreign direct investment, but San Diego does not. We don't get our share. And so increasing that share means more jobs and more opportunity. And it's the same with exports. So we're the 8th largest city in the country. By most of the economic standards that you look at, we fall somewhere between probably the 14th to the 17th largest economy in the country. And we are like 48th when it comes to exports. You know, we're down with my father's from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and we're tied with New Bedford, Massachusetts. And trust me when I say we shouldn't be tied with New Bedford, Massachusetts for anything. So, so no offense to anyone who's from New Bedford, love it dearly. But that's where we are when it comes to exports, and we've got some real work that we can do there. So, you know, key facts, and the one I'm going to stop and focus on is just this. If you were with me at the EDC offices and you listened to 100 phone calls that came into the office, that sort of tells you the story of what people think or know or want to know about our economy. And I would bet you that of every 10 of those phone calls that come in, 5 or 6 of them are related to the border somehow. So for anyone who thinks that that's really not a huge part of our economic future, it really, really is. And we increasingly know that when someone calls us in Mexico as part of what they're talking about, it's a very real phone call for San Diego, because there's only a few other places in the nation where you could capture sort of the innovation, R&D possibilities of San Diego, and then have the manufacturing price point and possibilities and talent of Mexico. And so it becomes sort of a dual talent issue, and one that we have to continue to promote and take advantage of. And as I say, for all of the talking that organizations like the EDC and others have done about this, we haven't probably hit stride yet, but with some advances in the border crossing, what's going to happen in the next few years with some very good success stories that we'll continue to kind of promote with folks who are setting up here, but also taking major parts of their operation, and instead of putting it in China, putting it in northern Baja. Those stories are the ones that we need to kind of share with more and more people. So I'm really not going to go through statistics, because I think almost everything, I don't know if Mike Combs, our researcher, is here. If he is, I apologize to him, because I'm going to blow through his work here. But I think they really, in a lot of ways, they touch on all the things that Ryan and Marnie talked about. You know, we tend to look at the region, and we compare it and contrast it with other places in the country, so we kind of always know where we stand on things like, what do the wages look like here versus what do the wages look like in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina? You know, what does a cost of a home look like here versus what does it cost in Austin, Texas? Because there's certain cities in a lot of different ways we're never going to completely be able to compete with, but there's other places that we have to watch quite closely because elements of their economy are growing, they're attracting in talented people, and that means that we're competing with them for those talented people. So let me kind of go through the growth slides from a little bit and kind of go to the nature of our economy, the way we look at it. Maybe a little bit of an oversimplified look at it, but a way that we want to constantly kind of be promoting to the world of what San Diego has here. And so we speak frequently about our innovation economy. I'd still argue with most people that, some people might say there is no really innovation economy. These are all clusters and sectors, and they are. Biotechnology and life sciences is by and away our largest. Health IT is a fast-moving and rising sector in that economy. Software and technology have been sectors in San Diego that have grown to a certain point, and other things like renewables and clean energy and defense also make up what we would refer to as our innovation sector. Places where engineers work, places where ideas come from, places where science, technology, engineering, and math is critical to the work that's being done, and that educated workforce that both Marnie and Ryan talked about is so critical to San Diego's story. So we're trying to promote that more and more, and frequently say to folks that while we don't look like Silicon Valley or some other places where you can rattle off 18 big names of companies right away, we may have the most diverse innovation economy in the country, the most clusters and the most sectors, as Marnie and Sandag have studied that over the year, that run very deep regionally, so that somebody with good technological skills could cross over from one place to another. So tourism. I mean, there's no talking about our economy and ignoring tourism, to be quite honest with you, for a whole host of factors. I mean, it employs 170,000 people, for starters. That's a huge part of our overall population. But second to that is the number of people who discover San Diego as a tourist or at a convention, and then think about, in our work we see this very regularly, think about San Diego as a place to either come to study, to live, to open a business, to expand a business. So the importance of tourism in getting people's attention focused on San Diego, and if you work at all with the San Diego Tourism Authority, they've pivoted a bit in the past few years from wanting us to simply look like folks splashing in waves in front of the Hotel del Coronado, and that's the picture we want the world to think of when they think of San Diego. It's a great picture, but also thinking of urban neighborhoods that smart young people might want to live in. Thinking of a diversity of locations around a county that's as big as the New England state that a lot of people might want to call home or bring a business to. So we work very closely hand in hand more than ever in trying to get the economic look of our community and the tourism look of our community to really line up. And then the military. I mean, this is the cornerstone of our economy in so many ways. And I think everything is boding quite well for San Diego right now. UT's covered this really well. Jen Steele is one of the best military writers you'll find anywhere and covers a lot of the economic aspects as well. But you hear frequently that the US is pivoting towards the Pacific with its future defense plans. That is, in fact, the defense plan title. It's the Pacific Pivot, or the pivot to Asia. And when we sit on the western seaboard of the United States with the largest military installation, that's very good for us. Another thing comes down to capacity. Do we have capacity on our bases to absorb more people coming? Do we have capacity to absorb more ships? And we do. And then in addition to that, we have really the only place now on the western seaboard that is making and retrofitting ships. And that, that strategy, that U.S. military strategy, is becoming increasingly a Navy and Marine-centric strategy. Again, all bodes very well for economic opportunity in San Diego. And what the military means to then defense technology that grows out of it in San Diego can't be understated. So a look at places that we compare and contrast ourselves to. Not surprisingly, I mean, the bigger places like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, places that have sort of a huge persona and have drawn in a lot of capital and wealth, are really the secondary places that we look at, and the others are really the ones that we look at most often. And I'm going to actually slide by sort of cost of doing business and a lot of these things to kind of get down to this, which is a long look ahead here. Issues for 2015. So, Peter Kallstrom opened this up, and our regional workforce system is going to need to play a critical role in continuing to do what it's always done, which is make sure that when ResMed, a major life sciences med device company here in San Diego, was thinking of leaving a few years ago, and they were hearing all the different opportunities to go to different places and rattling a lot of cages in California to say how hard it is to do business here. Essentially, when they really thought critically about where they could go and could they recoup the talent that they have here, their answer was pretty much no. When Illumina was thinking, I mean, the organization that MIT has called the smartest company in the world, was getting offers from other places around the country to essentially say, bring your manufacturing here and we'll give you costs that you've only dreamed of. But could they go to those places in the other part of the country and find the density of genomic scientific talent that we have here in San Diego? Absolutely not. So the universities are so critical to what's going to continue to drive our economy in the future. But not everybody has a bachelor's degree. 35%, I think, was the number that was just cited. Not everyone has a PhD or a master's degree. Getting folks as skilled as we possibly can to make sure that as technology grows and expands, they can grow and expand with it is the job of our universities. It's the job of our workforce system, and it's something that people like us have to take very seriously in helping to promote that. You even heard the mayor speak about this as a major strategy moving forward. Federal budget instability is something we have to watch closely. Marnie talked about the lack of capital. I was mentioning foreign direct investment. One thing that you have to realize is our economy, more than a lot of economies that we compete with, is beholden to that government budget. The military is completely beholden to that government budget. The money that comes in to fund our research institutions, which are the backbone of so much of the scientific work done in San Diego, is very beholden to that government budget. So when you see the dysfunction in Washington, it hits hard here in San Diego. And when you hear groups like the Chamber of Commerce and others are really trying to get aggressive back in Washington, that's why. And then the last thing that I would kind of say as we wrap up here is that last slide is just kind of important to look at. Global middle class growth. I don't really have to say much else beyond look at Asia. So as we start to think about where we're spending our time as an economic development entity for this mega region and for this county, it has to be far outside of here, getting the world to think about why San Diego is worth investing in, getting smart people to think about why San Diego is worth coming to. We've partnered with Brookings to do a lot of work in this area, and we'll have a big global summit coming up in March, and information is on our website available. But I'd point you the last thing to a National Geographic documentary as a point of pride for all of you that's coming out in 2015. 6 cities globally were chosen by the National Geographic Channel for their Smart Cities documentary series. San Diego is one of the 6. It's the only North American city. And the reasons why are kind of woven through the story they tell of us. It involves Qualcomm, and it involves Illumina. It involves things like the downtown library, some things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. It involves neighborhoods in our urban core that have really kind of stood the test of time and maybe become revitalized or completely reinvented themselves. It involves the science that's happening everywhere from SeaWorld to woven into that craft beer industry to our traditional biotech sector. But it's an amazing story about smart people doing very challenging things here, and they've been doing it for a very long time. And National Geographic and its economists see us as a place that's going to be powering that long into the future. We'll have a launch event on April 20th here in San Diego. We'll have a follow-up event on April 30th in Washington, D.C., and then that will launch in North America on the National Geographic Channel. And then we'll be going to London for a European launch, in Asia shortly after to Tokyo for an Asian launch, and we'll be doing some follow-up work later in the year with Australia and New Zealand. And that's where folks like me will be spending our time, really trying to make sure that the people who are investing in California and in the U.S. know that San Diego is a primary place to invest in. And I'm probably over time at this point in time, so I'm just going to wrap up and happy to field and answer any questions I can and stick around afterwards. So thank you.
Actually, you guys did great. We're like 2 minutes ahead of schedule now. So we have 17 minutes for questions. If you have questions and want to write them down, I usually have more by now, so from the audience. So I don't know if they're just not getting up here or you guys don't have any questions, but Roger and I will have questions, and I'm just going to kick one off with just kind of an easy one. But when you talk about job growth, and this can go to any of the panelists, you tell me about all the job growth we have here, but can you talk about the skills gap and the inequality that we're seeing? Because sometimes I think, yeah, that we're creating jobs, and I talked to John Horn, and he's like, oh, they were all retail jobs. Can you speak to that gap, and what are we going to do about that?
You go first. Oh, is on? Everybody hear me? No?
Uh-oh, technical.
That's it. That better? Okay. Just got to get closer. Maybe like a rock star. Okay. I think the skills gap has been with us for a while. This is not necessarily brand new in San Diego overall. And I think Sandag has tried to point out that, in our opinion, you sort of are what you invest in. And so if you take a look at how, for example, the public sector invests its money, we invest a lot of money in low value added infrastructure. And so we create opportunities for jobs. And for a long time, it kept our unemployment rate way below the state and the nation. But it also prevents upward movement, right? When you grow a piece of what Mark pointed out, dividing our economy into three major pieces, one of them being the visitor industry, when you know that 75% of the jobs there pay below the median. And I think that's what Ryan was pointing out in his picture about what those wage rates were and where that job growth is actually occurring. And then as a society, we invest more and more money in that industry. And we continue to grow the infrastructure in order to accommodate it. No matter how well they do, 100% occupancy rates in all hotels every day, you're still going to have low-paying jobs. There's no way out of this issue that way. And I think it's led to some discussion from the union side to say, look, we need to intervene here. We need to be able to establish a wage rate that's higher, right? Whether it's called a living wage or we raise the minimum wage, whatever we might do, because that industry simply is not going to be able to do it by itself. Remember, the other side of the coin is when we as a convention, we go to conventions or we go to visit these places with our families, whatever, on vacation, we don't want to pay $500, $600, $700 for a hotel room, right? We want to pay $100 or $200. Well, $100 or $200 represents a wage rate like we have today. The $500, $600, bigger than that. So there's this disconnect. And I think our whole point is we need balance in terms of what we invest in. We cannot create the infrastructure, no matter how well we do with that. It creates an overabundance of low value added jobs in the industry. So I think we are what we make ourselves. A change in the way that we invest, a change in the way that we add capacity to the economy for those jobs would in turn relate to a different balance. The visitor industry is important to San Diego. It's not going away. I'm not talking about tearing things down. All I'm talking about is put it into perspective about what you want to accomplish as a society in terms of long-term goal and building that as opposed to overbuilding in terms of those low value-added jobs. Does that kick it off for you?
I would just add that I think in terms of things that we are investing in that give us the potential to close the skill gap, the obvious one to me is education. I'm not just talking about sort of research universities, that's certainly part of it, but I think just basic K through 12 education, it was absolutely gutted as California went through a significant budget crisis. Things are starting to look a little bit better, but I think that's one of the places, if you're talking about You know, it used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago that you could take a high school graduate, or maybe not even quite a high school graduate, put them together with a lot of capital, tools, and equipment and generate a job that would pay a middle-class salary. You know, I'm thinking about manufacturing. The realities of the global workforce, cheaper labor there, mean that you need to carry your capital around with you now, by which, you know, that's kind of a geeky economist joke about human capital, by which we mean the investment you make in yourself, in terms of learning general education, specific skills, and I think that's something we have not done a very good job in the last 15 years or so, that we could do a lot better. It used to be, I think, the great strength of California, K through 12 all the way through our public university system, and we've kind of lost our way on that, and I'd like to see us get back to that.
Can folks hear me? Okay, so I mean, two things that I would add too is, one is that this is always hard because, and John will write about this, while we have that many folks who are no longer in the workforce or still unemployed, we have a lot of businesses in San Diego with higher paying jobs that still can't find the right people. And that's just not an easy, people talk about the skills gaps, it's not an easy gap to close, because as Marnie said before, it's not just taking somebody who was once employed in construction and suddenly they're easily transitioned into healthcare. This is a hard problem. If it was easy, it would be solved by now. We wouldn't be dealing with this. And I think, again, the mayor the other night talked about forming a task force to try to address that in a different way. And I think it's gonna cause an awful lot of us to have to think together about what that solution is. But the other thing that, you know, Gabby's going to talk in a bit, and I think it's fascinating to see what the tech startup crowd is doing in San Diego, because one is really everything they're creating are those higher wage jobs that Marnie's talking about, and they've got to kind of will it through. They're not getting the huge you know, systemic support that tourism gets or that other sort of legacy industry gets. So just a lot of really smart people kind of making it happen and figuring out kind of how to get the obstacles out of their own way, but they're creating higher wage jobs. The fascinating thing about them is that when they're successful, and even when we lose those companies, so if you remember the news about San Diego losing WebSense, losing Active Network, losing Omnitrax, I guess was the third, John. The fascinating part of that story that doesn't get written quite as well is that all the most talented people stay behind in San Diego, and they're all actually people who built those companies. They're not going to Austin. They're actually staying here and they're reinvesting. When they reinvest, they're reinvesting in sort of interesting new ideas. But those companies all start small, so it's not like they're immediately having 900 people doing that work. So I think, just to Marnie's point about what we invest in, we've got to really think critically about what's happening in that scene in San Diego before we actually lose it. You know, before we lose that momentum, when we lose the very smart people who are trying to make this work.
One of the things you all were talking about was San Diego's wages not growing, and you also mentioned the issue of minimum wage, which is going to be on the San Diego City ballot next year. We have this so-called sunshine tax. We all joke about that you pay a price for living in San Diego by getting less than you would in LA or San Francisco. So what do you think about the impact of the minimum wage being forced to grow up in San Diego compared to the rest of the state and the nation? Does that make San Diego really uncompetitive, or is that just a reflection of our overemphasis on low-wage jobs in the tourism business?
Make sure. Yeah, all right, thanks. And just to make sure, Roger, your question was, will the minimum wage make us uncompetitive? Okay, the answer to that is no. I'm not for the minimum wage, but I think it's important to note that there are simply too few jobs, not only locally, but also nationally, that depend upon the minimum wage and the characteristics of those who actually earn the minimum wage. I think we don't understand, I don't think, well, about the characteristics of that. It's typically not that there isn't any, but it's typically not. You know, two parents or one parent raising kids that are earning the minimum wage. That's the exception to the rule, not the rule. Not that it doesn't happen, right? It does happen. But you don't want to change the entire wage structure to try to get to a very small proportion of the population, right? If 4 to 5% of those who are working are actually earning the minimum wage, that's not a huge number. The second thing is of those who do earn the minimum wage, what proportion of those are really dependent upon keeping their household together is even smaller. This is an argument for a different kind of program than the minimum wage. It is way too blunt of an instrument to try and achieve those goals. The tax incentives that we have, where you could actually provide households who are qualified to receive more, an amount of money through taxes, a rebate back to them, would be a much more targeted program, and it would actually get to the people who need and in the United States deserve that kind of support. But so the minimum wage is not the way to do it. There are better programs out there that would be able to do it. Would it make us uncompetitive? No, it's not going to make us uncompetitive. It will hurt select industries, right? But broadly speaking, and a minute ago we were talking about, you know, our emerging growth technology companies. Okay, nobody in that industry earns a minimum wage. They're not going to be hurt. In fact, they look nationally and internationally for the labor sources, right? I mean, that's an entirely different picture. The visitor industry, which is larger in San Diego, there probably are some minimum wage workers there, but even the part that works in restaurants, exempt, right, because of tips. So I mean, there are lots of complexities that a blunt instrument like the minimum wage would not work, and it will not affect our competitiveness.
Ryan or Mark, do you have anything, or else I'll jump to another question? But
I think I'm good too.
okay. I'm going to kind of move over, I think, a little bit more into Mark, something you talked about with tourism being such an attraction here in San Diego. But if you're watching anything that's happening with the dollar, that puppy's getting stronger. How is that going to affect our tourism economy here? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I mean, you know, right now I think we're seeing, you know, almost record tourism in San Diego, and I think and as Marnie said, I mean, you know, for me, I really think that there's some huge challenges in the wage structure in certain sectors of our economy, but the thing that we focus in on is the fact that when conferences come to that convention center downtown, we have an opportunity every time you know, key thinkers from different sectors are here to sort of show off elements of San Diego that we maybe haven't shown off. And I don't mean the beauty of the beaches and things of that nature. I mean getting them up to see kind of some of what's happening away from the convention center. So we've got some real targeted strategies to do that. You know, right now it just seems like we're seeing a really good number of people visiting San Diego. That doesn't seem to be on the horizon like it's going to change at all. As I said before, I think the Tourism Authority is doing a very good job of kind of trying to rebrand San Diego a bit too, so that it's not just solely sort of the family traveling to be at the beach, but people thinking about, I actually think they're putting a lot of their money into sort of arts and cultural promotion now to get people to really kind of grasp and think of San Diego differently. So I see it continuing to be a key driver of our economy. I see it continuing to be kind of strong long into the future. I know we're becoming an expensive market. Interestingly enough, you know, while it's an industry that drives wages down, I know that we're an expensive city to live in. We're an expensive city to visit these days. But it doesn't seem to be hurting anything right now. It doesn't seem to be hurting the number of folks who are coming or the conventions that we're drawing into the region.
What's interesting to me, having studied San Diego history, is that all this was exactly what was being promoted in 1915 for the Panama California Exposition. It was built, you know, it was put on in order to attract people and businesses to San Diego, and there was a big push for San Diego to get growth and jobs, and we got the Navy out of that whole exercise 100 years ago. But somebody brings up a question which is kind of a new thing that people 100 years ago would have just been horrified to even consider. It said, this person asked, in promoting our city's economy on a global scale, how are we preparing to assume the resulting growth in population? In other words, making ourselves more popular and more visible on the world scene implies we want all of you to move to San Diego, and everybody in San Diego says, I don't want a new shopping center or something in Carmel Valley, or I don't want to redevelop this Walmart store into a 6-story high-rise in Marina Boulevard. So we had this yin and yang, smokestacks, geraniums argument in San Diego all the time. So one of you, or all three of you, probably have an opinion about this whole growth inducement that some of this economic development might bring on.
Maybe 2 points about this. In the last, well, since about the mid-90s, we've actually had more net out-migration to other parts of the United States than we've had in-migration. And a lot of that has to do with the region here being relatively unattractive, both high cost of living and relatively middle to low paying jobs that are being offered. That's not a long-term sustainable position to be in when your own population votes with its feet and moves to other parts of the United States as opposed to moving here. I think the key here, both on what Ryan pointed out and what Mark pointed out, was that the objective here is to be able to produce more output, necessarily with more people. So not a one-to-one ratio, but each person's skills, and when you add capital to them, are more productive. So wage rates rise, right? You're worth more to the individual business. And I think it's that balance that I talked about. But again, you know, back to the point about you are what you invest in. If you invest in the wrong kinds of infrastructure, you'll build the opposite, where there's one-to-one. And so what you will attract is more people, because as visitors, we require a lot of people to serve us when we visit places. That's what we do. But when we produce products, whether it's Qualcomm or something else, there are fewer and fewer people required to produce more and more output. So it's that balance between those two that are important, so you can have an impact in the long run on this kind of population growth by the way that you accommodate it in the jobs that we produce here in the region.
I just go back to the housing piece of this. I think that San Diego is an attractive place to come, but I think what we're seeing is, just given some of the land use decisions and the permitting decisions that we're making, we're running into the affordability crisis again. You know, we were talking about this a few years ago. Home prices came down a lot. It sort of receded to the background, but we're right back in you compare the median income to the median home price, and you come to a very dire conclusion. And I do think that addressing that is one of the getting past one of the potential roadblocks we have to kind of capitalizing as much as we can on this is an attractive place to live, both for quality of life considerations, but also just the vibrant innovation economy, the talented workforce, et cetera. But, you know, if you're confronting but I have to live an hour and a half from where I work, or I can't get the kind of place where I want to raise my family, that is kind of a deal breaker. And those exact kinds of workers that we're talking about that find San Diego attractive aren't going to be able to justify it to themselves and are going to go somewhere else.
I would just add quickly too, you know, Marnie had a slide up and Alex and I were looking at it, you know, very wide-eyed, and it was that slide that showed the massive growth of high-wage jobs and then the massive descent of wages for folks who are in that lower. I mean, it just was a perfect picture of a massive local, statewide, and national problem, and I mean massive. It was something that our economy and our lawmakers and folks are going to have to figure out. I think the only one thing I would add to what's been said is, you know, in other cities, and not that anyone's doing this perfectly, but in other cities, they're looking at places like, let's say, southeastern San Diego, differently than we are. I think we've got to start to do this differently. You take, you know, Jamaica, Queens, and New York, and they took a strategy to take an impoverished neighborhood and make it a tech center. And they didn't just kind of say, we're just going to promote it. But they made it, they incentivized businesses to want to be out there for the long run and invest in the neighborhood and invest in the people and train the people. And I think you have neighborhoods like southeastern San Diego who'd probably welcome that growth. But we're going to other neighborhoods and other places where folks are showing up and filling halls bigger than this to basically, as Roger knows, you know, scream against it. So I think as a region, we've got to think very critically about supporting those places that want the growth and need the growth, and getting out a little bit more proactively in the communities to work this through, so that we're not kind of getting into conference rooms and having these big battles and then having everybody kind of retreat back to their corners with no decisions.
Well, that's a great segue, because in the second panel, we're going to talk about land use, transportation, development, and if you're a startup, how do you deal with all these things when you're coming into these types of growth situations?
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Great, thank you. It's great to be back here at USD. It's nice to see this beautiful building. I know that my tuition bill went to create some fabulous real estate here. And it took me about 10 years to pay it off, so that was about 20 years ago. So following these two pillars of knowledge, I'm going to try to bring down to a fundamental level a lot of the information that they gave us earlier. They had some great graphs, which is wonderful. I've got better pictures than they do. I am a real estate developer, hence the beautiful pink tie. It's almost a requirement these days. So I'm just going to jump into what I have prepared. I'm going to try to say a couple of things that are provocative and maybe even a little controversial. So thank you again for having me. You know, I don't work for Sandag or the university or something like that, so I'm just going to give you a very quick overview about who I am. I did graduate from what we call the Reedy School of Real Estate here at USD. Phenomenal real estate center here. I was an urban condo developer for 10 years, and I like to say that I survived the Great Recession. What that means, it was 8 years of phenomenal times and 2 years of hell. I'm currently a development consultant to a number of local large developers, focusing mostly on apartments, office, and hotel properties. Not as much single family as some other people said. That market is busy, but not as busy as it used to be. I'm active in a number of real estate organizations such as Urban Land Institute, Building Industry Association, Lambda Alpha, and the Downtown Partnership. And as I said earlier, my goal here is to translate some of the information said earlier and then basically apply some conclusions to the real estate market. I've got 3 slides to talk about 3 property types. I've got a couple of numbers. We're not gonna spend too much time on the numbers. We're gonna get into some more conclusions, and then I'm gonna take the liberty of identifying some opportunities and challenges. So the apartment market, you know, quite frankly, the apartment market's on fire. Asking rents are up 0.2% last month. For a county-wide average of about $1,400 and change. What's phenomenal and what's driving that is San Diego has the 3rd lowest apartment vacancy rate in the United States, which is truly amazing, at 2.4% and declining, which is a phenomenal opportunity for developers and investors in apartments. The continued demand, or what we call absorption, is outpacing construction and permitting of multifamily properties. That's very important because it's showing an upward and continued upward trend. Cap rates are declining by about 30 basis points in the 3rd quarter to about 6.3%. And keep in mind, a declining cap rate works inversely. So as a cap rate goes down, the value goes up. I always want to make sure I explain that, and not saying values are going down, but cap rates are going down. And quite frankly, San Diego's appetite for apartments is just unsatisfied, both from a renter, from an investor, and from a developer. Everybody's very aggressive. I chose this picture down here. This is a downtown apartment, and believe it or not, it does say for lease down there. That little light there, that one unit with a light on is about 925 square feet, and it probably rents for $3,200 a month, which is insane. That's more than my mortgage, and I live in a really cool condo in downtown too. So I don't know who could afford that, but I hope they're enjoying it. The next market that I work in is the office market. Not as rosy of a picture, still good, but not as good. Average rental rate up about 1/10 of a point last month for an average rental rate of about $2.46. Nationally, people use annually. Here in San Diego, we use monthly, so that's why I have the difference there. The vacancy rate last month reduced about 10 basis points to 16.1%, which seems awfully high, but quite frankly, it's slightly less than the national average. I'm going to get into a little bit more about my thoughts on the office market in a minute. Only a few projects are under construction, so that should help the office vacancy rate. And what we're seeing is office users consolidating, and we're seeing more communal offices, less individual private offices, more open offices, which takes less space. And quite frankly, more people are working from home. I've got an office, quite frankly, that is maybe the size of my closet, Most of my office work is done in someone's conference room, which is where the best work is done, is not separate in an enclosed office, but in a conference room, and that's what's exciting. San Diego's economy is not necessarily conducive to large office users, rather more flex space. A lot of the Qualcomms, a lot of the biotech companies, they're not going for big offices. They're like in Houston or in New York or in Chicago, where they have large financial sectors which have offices. We're more of a biotech and high-tech industry capital here, so we don't have a lot of just vertical offices. I say that I'm currently working with a client, and we're developing a 323,000 square foot, 16-story office tower in downtown. So even though I'm saying it's not great, I'm actually building a very large office project myself. So I just wanted to qualify that for everybody. And then to me, and I think Supervisor Horn started off with the hotel properties, this is right now the cherry on top of the ice cream for everybody right now. Record number of visitors to San Diego in 2014, 16.4 visitors, spending $8.4 billion. I mean, that is a lot of coin. County-wide occupancy rate is currently about 71%. That's up almost 4.5%. And ADR is your daily rate of about $134. Which is up about 5%, which is from last year. A phenomenal increase, one of the strongest markets in the West and nationwide. What's interesting that I like to point out, $212 million of TOT taxes. These are taxes that hotels generate when people stay there. TOT taxes generated in 2014, up about 6%. Some challenges in the market, and I know we spoke about the airport earlier, is San Diego still lags San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. San Francisco and LA due to business trips, and then Vegas, you could get a direct flight from Vegas to anywhere. I mean, absolutely anywhere. So we have a wonderful airport. I love it. I live downtown. I work downtown. It's right there, but it is constrained. And I think we're going to talk about some transportation options next. So the hotel market, what they're encouraging, quite frankly, is funding of the convention center third phase expansion and continued funding of their marketing district. These opportunities will help grow this sector, will help grow jobs, and will help grow the economy. What I'd like to do next, and I'm trying to make my comments brief so we could have more Q&A time, is I'd like to talk about some challenges and then some opportunities that we have here in real estate. Obviously, the loss of the redevelopment agencies has been a hindrance, and people in Sacramento, in their infinite wisdom, thought that redevelopment wasn't a good thing. I disagree, but it is what it is now. Cities still need to encourage large and small projects to continue the development of key areas of town. A couple other challenges I wanted to discuss. Drought, the extended drought and raising utility costs is significantly hindering not only the construction, but the operation of properties. And I remind my friends, NOI, net operating income, is always net of expenses. And even though you're pushing revenues, your expenses are going up, and therefore your values are still hindered. So just a couple of things to think about. Of course, as a real estate developer, I say that everything is overregulated, to no surprise. I'm working with a client on a project in San Francisco, and it is a beautiful city, phenomenal restaurants, but when you go into City Hall there, man, there is a target on your back. San Diego is not the same way. It is so much better than San Francisco. Let's make sure it doesn't come that way. Let's make sure that when people go into the city to say, hey, we want to build a good project, that people there help us do so. I'm not saying all projects are good, but if somebody's got a good project, let's find a way to help them and me. Smart growth in urban centers with walkable communities. I'm going to say something controversial in a minute. Yes, one of the transportation solutions is more freeways, but we need to understand that we want to have walkable communities and smart growth. So here's my controversial statement. I was in New York over the holidays to go see the 9/11 memorial, and Parking and traffic is horrible in Midtown Manhattan for a reason, because it's an awesome place to be. Let's not be afraid of density. Let's not be afraid of traffic problems. Let's not be afraid of parking problems. Let's make places awesome places to be. I'm not suggesting that in Poway or in Scripps Ranch or in Carmel Valley, but let's find clusters of developments and let's make them great places where people are outside of their cars and walk around. So that's my controversial statement for the morning. Some other challenges, and this is, in my opinion, a very, very big challenge, is affordability. There is that guy living in that 900 square foot apartment paying an exorbitant amount. Unfortunately, most people cannot afford that. We have a number of phenomenal affordable housing developers building great communities here in our county. We need to find a way to shrink the gap between the haves and the have-not when it comes to real estate and allow people to have a nice home without being overcharged. Opportunities for San Diego real estate, I'll get to the bottom picture in a minute. One of the things that I think is most important, and this has been in the newspaper a lot, especially in the UT, is empower the local community planning groups to manage their community. I spoke a lot about density. I live and work in downtown, and I like to manage downtown. But I tell you, if Carmel Valley wants to do something or not do something, like Juan Paseo, that's their decision. Don't let somebody who doesn't live and work in that community drive what they do or what they don't do. In my opinion, it's their community. We need construction of large projects. The San Diego Convention Center I spoke about earlier, and quite frankly, I believe it is a good thing for San Diego, and the mayor agrees with me, to have a Charger Stadium. I'm not about to discuss a financing plan or where it should go, but I believe it's a good thing for San Diego. I live at 10th and Island in downtown, and I don't live there because I thought it would be cool to live in the East Village. I live there because I want to walk to a Padres game. It really means a lot to me. Not everybody's that crazy about baseball as I am, but when people get together, opportunity comes together. We have some great residential buildings, some great office buildings, some great restaurants and retail, and the catalyst of that was Petco Park. It would not have happened without it. I'm going to keep trucking here. Significant investment from international buyers is also very important, and we as a group need to foster that. Mexico and China specifically. What I'm seeing, I'm seeing corporate brochures and sales brochures are actually in English, but translated into Spanish and translated into Mandarin. And what we are doing is we are reaching out to our friends in Mexico and China and inviting them to come here to San Diego. Very, very important. I talked about energy costs earlier. Renewable energy incentives will help for long-term operating costs. Very, very important. And then obviously our community and our civic leaders need to focus on public assets, specifically parks, libraries, and infrastructure. Mayor Faulkner focused on streets significantly in his State of the City address on Tuesday, and I thought it was well received. Quite frankly, Kevin, we need to do more as well. So lastly, I'm wrapping it up here. I've got a couple of just real quick thoughts, and I want to end on a high note. San Diego added a whole bunch of jobs. A lot of these are important. We need to continue to do more. Biotech, super hot. Healthcare is obviously expanding. Defense is strong. And tourism is just simply epic. It really is, and we need to foster these things. San Diego has set the standard of growth for California. When it comes to the real estate sector, we were the ones that let it down, and we're going to be the ones that are going to lead it out, and I guarantee you that. Housing prices, for those interested in single-family detached homes, housing prices I'm seeing as being stable with consistent gains, and the absorption is managing growth. What we're seeing is people who used to live and work in downtown are getting married, having children, and moving out to the suburbs, buying a single-family home. So that market is strong. And then, I've got one last thought that I want to bring out is, as a recovering condo developer myself, condos are returning, which I think is great. Nat Bosa, our friend from Canada, is leading the pack with, believe it or not, $1 million units. Every unit in this building will be at least $1 million at Pacific and Broadway in downtown San Diego. So in conclusion, the real estate market is great. It's getting better. And again, we led us into this mess that we were in a few years ago, and we're going to lead us out. Thank you very much.
All right, a lot to think about on that. That was great, Alex. Thanks so much. Jim is going to take us on a little ride on our transportation network.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Transportation really serves as the circulatory system for the economy. And the better the transportation flows, the better and more healthy the economy is. At SANDAG, we're preparing the transportation plan that will serve us for the next 35 years, till 2050. We call it San Diego Forward. And if we're going to plan to 2050, we have to have a good idea what 2050 is going to look like. And this slide, we have some forecasters back at SANDAG, very smart people. This slide gives us a few key metrics. We're going to add about 1 million people to San Diego County over the next 35 years. We're going to add about 500,000 more jobs and 1/3 more housing units, many of them in the multifamily, as has been said previously. But when you're forecasting out that far, there are some pitfalls. This is a projection that SANDAG did 16 years ago in 1999. And this is what they thought 2020 was going to look like. And every blue dot is 10 new housing units, and every purple dot is 10 new jobs. And we're only 5 years away from this, and we know that this is not the case. I mean, you look at all the development in the east part of the county, and quite frankly in the desert, that is just not happening. And this is for about 3.9 million people. We just a year and a half ago did a new projection for 2050, and this is for 4.1 million people. So we have a lot more people in a lot less space. And this is a result of two things. One, the market forces like Alex and others were talking about, where people want more walkable, dense development. But two, it's really a reaction to the local land use plans that jurisdictions have updated in the last 15 years. Most of them have done so to encourage that sustainable type of growth and protect our San Diego quality of life. So now that we have an idea at least of what we think 2050 is going to look like, we have to develop a transportation plan to serve those needs. And these maps are a little difficult to read at this resolution. We have transit on the right and highways on the left, but the main takeaway is that it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. With transit on the right, we are expanding the trolley system, increasing frequencies, adding express trolleys. We're increasing frequencies on Sprinter and Coaster. We're expanding the local bus system. We're actually adding rapid and bus rapid transit systems. We just started doing that last year to pretty good results. We even later in the plan have some streetcars, and the high-speed rail is also included by 2050, although that's quite a ways off. So it's really an all-hands-on deck with transportation. There's not, with transit in particular, there's not an option we're not exploring. On the left, you see the highway system, and it has been said, I think, we're not really building any new highways, but we are going to expand most of the highways we have, but we're not adding general purpose lanes. We're adding what are called managed lanes. And the managed lanes can be HOV lanes, they can be express toll lanes. We see both of those on the I-15 in particular. And critically, they also serve as transportation lanes for our bus rapid transit system, so that when we expand highways with managed lanes, we're adding capacity to our transit system as well. So like I said, it's an all hands on deck, kind of what we'd like to refer to as a balanced approach. But in addition to highways and transit, we have a lot of other aspects of the regional transportation plan we're developing that help improve goods movement, active transportation, walking and bicycling, which are very near and dear to my heart. We have smart growth incentive grants that we give out, and transportation systems management. And this is kind of using high tech to wring the most efficiency we can out of our transportation system, delivering traffic information to your smart device, improving the management of both our highways and transit system using information technology. And those are some fairly exciting programs. We also have transportation demand management, basically encouraging people to use alternative modes. We have a robust van pool system, carpool programs, shared use mobility, which is things like Car2Go and Zipcar and the new bike share that's coming out this year. And we also do environmental mitigation for our capital programs that need things. When we expand highways and rail lines, we often have to do environmental mitigation. All this, of course, does not come cheaply. We have about $160 billion worth of projects we'd like to build, but we are expecting over the next 35 years to receive about $105 billion. As you can see in blue, most of that goes to transit. About half goes to transit. A little less than a third in green goes to our highway system. The orange slice is about 13%. That's local streets and roads. And then about 10% for the other innovative programs that I've mentioned. One important thing I want to note, of this $105 billion roughly that we're expecting to receive from various sources over the next 35 years, very little is really flexible. We get a lot of state and federal government funds for transit and also for highways, and we match those with a lot of our local funds. So, and we can't take highway funds and move them to transit or vice versa. So in the end of it, really less than 10% of our funding is flexible. And most of those flexible funds we're putting into transit and the other innovative programs. Not really any of it is going to highways. So when you're asking people to trust you spending $100 billion, they want to know that you're going to spend it well. And that's my job as an economist, to prove, to find out if we're doing that and to prove it. So we try to answer with the economic analysis for this plan that I'm conducting 3 basic questions. One is, are the benefits quite simply greater than the cost of the plan? And the second is, how do those transportation investments improve our economy? How specifically? And third, will those transportation investments support San Diego's competitiveness by supporting the key sectors that Marnie and Mark and everyone else talked about, our high-tech sectors and tourism? So the first part of the analysis is the benefit cost analysis, and not to get too geeky about it, we developed a tool based on our travel model. And our travel model, we call the ABM, is a very powerful tool. It basically estimates and forecasts the travel behavior of the entire region. And you put a transportation system into it, and it can tell you how long where you're going to go. It estimates where you're going to go, how long it's going to take you to get there, and we can compare the plan that we're developing to what we call the no-build scenario, which is basically we complete the projects that are in the pipeline over the next few years and then don't expand our transportation system. So the model tells us how much time the plan saves versus no build, how much emissions are reduced, and other types of benefits. And then we can compare that stream of benefits with the cost over the life of the plan. And here are some preliminary results. I actually hope I have some more updated results in my inbox right now, but we're looking at $29 billion in costs, and that's compared to the $100 billion I was talking about earlier. That's because we discount costs in the future at a 4% rate. So this is really the net present value of total costs is $29 billion. Then we see our benefits categories, and those total benefits are over $55 billion for a ratio of about 2 to 1, which means for every dollar we put into the transportation system, we get $2 in benefits back. And that's a rate of return of about 10% real rate of return, so that's a fairly good investment. But we also want to know how those investments impact the economy. And we know that when we invest in building and operating a transit system, that provides a boost to the local economy. And we use, again, not to get too geeky, an input-output model that helps us see how those expenditures filter through the economy. When we give a construction company a contract for $1 billion to build a trolley line, they hire people, and that's a direct impact. And then that construction company also buys trucks and cement and other things. Those are indirect impacts. And those workers that they've hired, they go out to celebratory dinners and they buy a new surfboard, and that's an induced impact. So together, we estimate with preliminary results that over the life of the plan in an average year, the transportation investments that we're doing support about 18,000 jobs in the region and about $2.4 billion in GDP. We also want to know what are the effects of having that more efficient transportation system. And we need a way to translate basically those benefits that came out of our benefit cost analysis into output and jobs. And we found a model, another economic model that can do that from the Regional Economic Models, Inc. And a better transportation system really allows your business to access a wider array of suppliers and partners. It allows you to cast a wider net into a bigger pool of labor, hopefully to catch the more talented people. And it also reduces some of your transportation-related production costs. So using those factors in this model, we estimate, again, preliminary numbers, that by 2050, we'll add about 20,000 jobs a year to the economy of San Diego and $5 billion in that GDP to the San Diego economy, just the benefits of having a more efficient, faster-moving transportation system. We also want to find out how the transportation system are going to impact those key industries that we talked about, and we did this in two ways. The first way was we looked at where those industries are located versus where we're going to make transportation improvements. And the second way is, quite frankly, we just asked the people in those industries. We had focus groups this summer. We met with military, biocom, hospital industry, education, and we presented this plan in a little more detail than I presented it to you, and really got their feedback on what's going to happen. Because I can sit in my office all day and speculate on how it's going to impact those industries, but really we felt it was important to get it straight from the people in the business community. And what we heard back from them was a lot of support for the generally balanced approach that we put together here. And these are smart business people, and they recognize, as a lot of our panelists do, the benefits of denser development and investments in transit. But importantly, they also mentioned that the transit system as it currently exists doesn't really suit their needs. We have a lot of work to do. So this is part of that mapping process that I was talking about earlier. In this graphic, the blue bubbles are employment in those key traded industries, and the green corridors are our transit improvements that we're looking at. And the takeaway is that jobs close to transit are going to improve over the next years by about 30%. About 43% of jobs now are accessible by transit. That number is going to be 71% by the time we're done with the plan. And in cooperation with the highway improvements that we're making, those really do serve those key what we call the traded industry clusters, the industries that support San Diego, the ones where we have a competitive advantage: biotech, tourism, clean tech, our maritime industries, all the ones that we've been talking about all morning. This slide really just sums it up. In the top left, you have your benefits that are outweighing the cost by 2 to 1, and we see in the bottom left how that more efficient transportation system takes those benefits and increases our GDP, allows businesses to connect with workers, customers, partners, and suppliers. We know that investing in transportation in both operations and construction gives a boost to the economy, and we know that our transportation system supports our key sectors here in the region. So we really think we've come up with a plan as flexible as we can over the next 50 years to really have a positive impact on the San Diego economy. And that's it for me. If you want to know more, sandieg.org/San Diego Forward. The draft of the economic analysis, which I'm feverishly working on right now, should be done later in the spring. And I'd be happy to answer any questions either via email or when I'm at the dais. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. I think one of the questions we'll want to ask you when we get to it is how do we fill that $55 billion funding gap? Let's see. Final panelist for this segment is Gabriella Dow. She's going to talk about the plug-and-play startup sectors of San Diego.
And you said it's just this one here? Perfect. Thank you. It is so great to be here, and I could spend the entire day talking about startups, but I know that we want to get to questions. So I'm going to jump right into it. And what I want to cover today is first the startup ecosystem here in San Diego, and take a long view look at that, but also talk about some immediate opportunities, because I know that we have some entrepreneurs and some investors in the audience and watching online right now that want to know what's hot, what are the opportunities today. But what I first want to do, and what I always do when I talk about startups, is really distinguish between a startup and a small business. They're two very different things. They both start with a wonderful idea, of course, but then they can go in different directions. When you talk about a startup, you start to hear some terminology that you wouldn't really hear with your average business. MVP, a minimum viable product. Is this going to scale? What are the funding sources that are possible for this venture? And what are we dealing with in terms of risk? Minimum viable product is a terminology that means we're going to put very smart engineers frequently with some good marketing people. We're going to throw something together, and then we're going to see if it works, if it gets massive traction, if it truly scales. And if in a few months we don't see that, we're going to throw it away. That's not typical for a small business. The people that are willing to take these risks with the entrepreneurs are the venture capitalists, the angel investors, and there's something very exciting happening in the world of funding for startups, and that's crowdfunding, or you see syndicates, where you have people that are looking to invest $5,000 or $25,000, but they're spreading that across potentially 100 startups. And so a typical rule is unless you're investing 1% of your total net worth in 100 startups, 5,000 or 25,000 or 50,000 in each one, then this really might be just too risky of a proposition. But there are always the believers and the entrepreneurs that risk it all in launching their own venture. And that's where you see that they are potentially going to fail fast. They accept it, they move into the next potential opportunity, or they do these pivots. And I've worked with startups where at one board meeting, they're working with QR codes, and then you come back and now they're doing different things with mobile apps. And then they're suddenly doing things within a whole different industry. They're constantly pivoting, trying to find where they're going to get that traction. Serial entrepreneur Elon Musk gives a perfect example where he says, imagine taking everything that is of value to you, putting it all in this incredible race car that you've built. And he said this at the time that he had already built PayPal, and he was launching Tesla, which people thought was insane. He was launching SpaceX, which people thought was insane, but he wrestled away some contracts from Northrop Grumman, or large military space contracts, and he was also building Solar City. And he said, what I'm doing is basically taking everything that's of value to me, putting it into a sports car and driving it off a pier. And I don't know if the planks are going to be there by the time that I reach the amount of cash that I'm burning, but that is the drive of an entrepreneur. And so it is, again, very high risk. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, of our country, and startups are a component of that. All of that said, San Diego has been deemed to be the #1 city for startups. You've seen several studies, I think, but in March of last year, Forbes came out with something that was substantial. They worked with Radius, an analyst group that analyzes over billions of data points every single day. And for this particular study, they looked at data from 27 million US businesses in cities across the country. And San Diego ranked the highest, and their criteria was, one, the percentage of small businesses as a total of all businesses in that particular city, the percentage of those small businesses that were in high growth industries. We've been hearing about all of those high growth industries here in San Diego. And then the percentage of those small businesses that accept credit cards, that have Facebook pages or websites, that receive online reviews. To some extent, by San Diegans, this study was criticized because they said, well, these metrics don't matter. Of course, everybody accepts credit cards. Well, we take that for granted because we're the #1 city for startups. in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, this is not necessarily the case. Small businesses are not on social media. And so I was a very staunch defender of San Diego truly deserving that ranking as the #1 city for startups, but there was the criticism that how could this be in a state where there is a very high tax rate, where perhaps it's not very friendly to businesses. But we look back again, the large tech companies like Facebook and Google and Apple, they are based in California. And the country and the world really is starting to discover San Diego, and that's a very exciting thing for all of us. But I wanted to put that into some perspective. Why do I say, or why did I so staunchly defend that we are the #1 city for startups? Giving you a long view of startups in general and then a couple of personal anecdotes. So I used this growth curve that was put out by the NASDAQ. It has some of their key milestones starting from when they were launched in 1971. I was not born yet. I actually moved to San Diego when I was 5 years old in 1981 from Guadalajara, Mexico, so you can do the math. But had a, and I moved here because my family was doing real estate investment, and the healthcare institutions were very attractive to my family, Scripps and some of the other hospitals that they were already coming up, the shopping, all the spending that you see, again, from Mexican and other international families and business people. In 2000, I was part of a small team that launched something called GovPartner. And this was what we believed, and it was launched in Rancho Bernardo. We believed that cities were going to be changed by the use of the internet. They were going to be issuing permits online. Half of the mayors and city managers we talked to thought that was insane. It was not secure. It didn't make any sense. And others believed that, yes, the internet is changing society. It probably will impact local governments. And so that was a mission that I went on, and we took 12 years to grow that company, and to the point that it was acquired by a national software provider, Cartograph. To give you some perspective, around 2002, right after the dot-com bust. So I saw San Diego in 99, 2000. It was very exciting. If you were an 18-year-old with a dot-com, you were going to receive some form of funding. And so then, of course, that bubble burst very quickly. We continued to grow GovPartner, and we became acquainted with Plug and Play, which is an incubator and accelerator that was launched in 2002 by an investor that was an early investor with Google, with PayPal. But he had the idea of bringing multiple startups into one building. He bought a 100,000 square foot facility and filled it with startups over the year, and thought that the healthy competition, the resources, the camaraderie that is created through that model is something that would be a wise investment, and indeed it has been. Since that time, Plug and Play has raised over $3 billion for almost 300 startups that are in their network. And I'll talk about how they ended up launching Plug and Play San Diego. But of those 300 startups globally, there are now about 20 startups that are from San Diego that are part of that portfolio. So Plug and Play went on to have facilities in Moscow, Singapore, Berlin, Mexico City. They launched the Calgary program in Canada, and I won't fast forward too much to why they selected San Diego. But for our own community here in the meantime, you really started to see around 2006 a resurgence. To some extent, people could very easily pull equity from their homes, so that was one way that people were launching new ventures. And so Startup Circle, for example, is one representative organization that was launched in 2006. And Mark talked about the crossover of the different talent that we have here in San Diego. Startup Circle is a good example of that. Its founder, Robert Reyes, is a USD graduate. He went on to do some work in Estonia, doing a lot of investment in startups in Europe. Then he came back and was an executive with Amylin Pharmaceutical at the time that he also had launched Startup Circle. That, of course, was acquired by Baxter, and Robert went on to another really exciting startup right now, Stone Brewing. He's currently the head of sourcing for Stone Brewing. So you see how we really do mix all of the different talented people that we have with the different industries. My background, for example, is in politics, working at the White House, working for a governor, working at 2 different CNN bureaus. A passion for government was able to take off here in San Diego because of the opportunity in e-government, merging that with software development. And I also launched another startup that failed fast. It was a startup, Friends with Class, where we created custom classes, and people would book them online. It was profitable within the first 3 months. We had about 50 instructors. We had a whole host of about 2,000 people that were taking classes, but again, it wasn't scaling at the level that we anticipated. And so again, that's a decision that our local entrepreneurs often make. Am I going to build a lifestyle business? You know, a nice $30 million annual revenue where you create jobs is a wonderful thing for San Diego. Or you do have the entrepreneurs locally that are looking to really create the next Instagram or the next multi-billion-dollar valuation. And so that's another key business. By the year 2012, the biggest complaint that we were hearing in San Diego was that there was no access to capital. And we did hear that San Diego does lag in venture capital. And so I was involved with Robert and another local entrepreneur from La Jolla, Alex Rudy, in courting Plug and Play and convincing them, working initially to try to convince them to make San Diego their first US program. They were looking at the time at Boston, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. When we finally got them to come down and had a meeting, they were very upfront. San Diego, it isn't here. We don't see it. We don't know that the talent is here necessarily. We haven't met any investors that are telling us this is where we need to be. But we were adamant that they meet the entrepreneurs themselves. And once they had a chance to meet some of these former Qualcomm or even current Qualcomm employees that were launching business, once they started to see that we're not just building apps here in San Diego, we're solving some very difficult challenges with analytics and some other industries that I'll get into, they were convinced. They went ahead and picked San Diego. They launched their first US satellite program, and of course, 2 years later, in 2014, when that Forbes study came out, they said, oh, we knew all along, of course it's San Diego. So we really are working to prove ourselves year after year, but the startup community in San Diego has really delivered, not just the entrepreneurs, but all of these different programs. And this is just a snapshot of some of the incubators and some of the accelerators that are here in town. Some are associated with the university. So you have Connect with UCSD, or you have some amazing things happening at San Diego State with the Zahn Innovation Center. We have other incubator groups that are specifically for female entrepreneurs. San Diego is doing a terrific job with female entrepreneurs, and so you see Geek Girl and Hera Labs. The infrastructure is here, but we have to continue to foster the mindset for everybody. And when you have your mayor going on local TV news with a graduate who has already raised $400,000 for his venture, this isn't a business show. This is just the regular morning news. Or you have a startup class. Those are pictures from a class in Chula Vista that brought people to co-merge and to take lessons, which is the picture that you see down below. That really shows you that we have the mindset here and we need to invest in the future generation. Tijuana, you have got to get down there and really see the incredible things that are happening. We had Ahorro Libre, which was the first Tijuana-based startup that became part of the Plug and Play portfolio. And Tijuana is really marketing itself, not to San Diego, but you're seeing Accenture, other businesses out of the Bay Area, other parts of the country coming to get software development done. Sorry, these are happening automatically. To get software development done in Tijuana, in Rosarito, as opposed to sending the software development work to India, to China, to Eastern Europe. So they're developing algorithms for insurance companies. They're building apps for education sectors. You really should go and take a look at what's happening down there. And we also are turning out here, obviously, in San Diego. So this is a picture from December 9th, where we had the Plug and Play pitch competition. Over 450 people came out to see 20 startups pitch. 7 of those startups were selected by Plug and Play to be funded to participate for 3 months in a program in Sunnyvale, and then come back to San Diego and continue to grow their businesses. And we had a rock star panel of judges. The person in the middle, Saeed Amidi, who's the founder of Plug and Play, again, was an early investor in PayPal, in Google, in Dropbox. And just a few days after that picture was taken, 2 days later, one of the startups that he launched in Sunnyvale in the Plug and Play program went on to become the #1 IPO of 2014, tech IPO. So this is the level of investors that are looking at San Diego that are excited at what they see here. And one of the startups that was funded from San Diego was Airbits, a Bitcoin startup. So Plug and Play is not only looking at San Diego as a city where they're getting this talent, they've actually developed different accelerators in different sectors. Bitcoin is one of those sectors. Very risky venture. Bitcoin as a digital currency, I think, lost about 30% in value just this week. So it is something that remains to be seen. But what Lending Club is doing, challenging the banks, was also seen as a crazy idea, very risky venture 7 years ago, and obviously that is something that has paid off. Robotics is another important sector for San Diego. This is a pitch by Next Robotics. But these are the sectors that I see Plug and Play and the investors that I work with getting excited about. I mentioned finance, mobile health, IoT, or the Internet of Things, big data analytics, infrastructure, which includes transportation, water resources, and biotech. Although Plug and Play is not investing in biotech companies, that, of course, is the bedrock for San Diego. When I talk about mobile health, I also include endurance and action sports. That's something that is very exciting here in San Diego. It's not just our bodies that are connected to technology. Now we're seeing our refrigerators, our cars. I have the Nest system at my house, our air conditioner is connected to the internet. And as you connect all of these devices and all of these people, you have massive amounts of data. So analytics and big data crunching is another important sector for San Diego. And then water is a distinct passion for me. And that is something where San Diego is also leading in innovation. Last week, Bill Gates blew up the internet with this picture of him drinking recycled wastewater. So this was wastewater 5 minutes ago, and then he drank it and said it was pure water based on some new technology that had been deployed, which everybody was saying, how is this possible? What is this all about? Well, here in San Diego, we have our own programs, whether it's pure water or in East County, we have the Padre Dam Repurification Project. These are significant infrastructure and global resource challenges that are being solved here in San Diego. So a mobile app is nice, of course, to share pictures, but we're curing diseases in San Diego. We're doing genome sequencing. We are doing innovation with desalination in addition to recycled water. And that's what investors see about the talent in San Diego, that we're solving problems that really matter on a global scale. So I encourage everybody here to start up yourselves, get out there, get on Twitter if you're not already on Twitter. There are some amazing conversations being had. And get out and rediscover San Diego. I was at One Columbia Place earlier this week. Incredible combination of live and work, terraces with free Wi-Fi. I mean, we're seeing some amazing renovations in downtown. The event that we had in December was at 707 Broadway, closer to East Village, but also some really exciting things in downtown San Diego. Carlsbad is doing some incredible things. Their Life in Action campaign is really showcasing some key sectors in that part of the county. And even up in Oceanside, I'm very excited to see that they're using some startup technologies to get the word out to their own businesses for things like sustainability. So the city's figuring out how to launch an app in just 6 weeks and really becoming a support base, as all large industries and corporations need to be, for the local talent and the startups that are here. And of course, Mark Cafferty and his team at the San Diego EDC with their Go San Diego campaign. It's all in the palm of your hands now. If you have a mobile phone, you jump on something like Twitter, you do the hashtag for today, which people have been tracking this conversation through SD Econ Round, or you do the hashtag Go San Diego or the hashtag Life in Action, and on a daily basis, you can attend an event, you can visit an incubator, you can go and see for yourself why we're so excited about all of the opportunities for San Diego's future. Thank you.
Oops. Well, that was a stream of fabulous ideas, and I don't know where to begin.
I'm ready to go start up my own business. Forget this newspaper business. I want to, Gabby, just hit you up with a really quick question, because there are so many different things, ideas that you gave us. But can you talk a little bit about crowdfunding, how that has changed the industry? Because we get pitched ideas every single day at UT San Diego. Oh, look at my Kickstarter page. Look at how I'm doing. Talk about how that funding has it's obviously helped. Just tell me how that's changed.
Sure, and is this on? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do even with the Jobs Act, where it actually made that a legal vehicle for crowdfunding. And one of the largest crowdfunding platforms was developed right here in San Diego, GoFundMe. So what that means is that whereas when you think of a traditional venture capitalist, you're thinking of either a very stuffy bank or you have to be up in Silicon Valley with millions of dollars to invest and be able to take that risk. What we're seeing today is startups can launch like Hush Technologies, which I showed there with the mayor. And they said, we're going to build these. We have the technology. This is our team. We're going to build these earbuds that are connected to your mobile phone. So you don't hear anything except for the interruptions that you actually want. You're able to drown out everything else, but if an important phone call comes in, or you can have your alarm directly to your ear without waking up whoever you're with. But how are they going to get funding, right? Who's going to fund a 22-year-old recent graduate, especially as we're seeing that there has been a little bit of a dip in San Diego particularly. They can now put up a website, a crowdfunding site, and say, it's almost like a pre-order. So pre-order and invest in us, and we will make this happen. You have to have a net value, I think, of over $1 million to be able to do crowdfunding and actually buy equity. And that is something that the administration is looking to change at the federal level. And I was talking with Howard Lenhart, who was one of our judges at the panel in December, and he's an investor and an entrepreneur out of Santa Monica. He is working on doing a television show that will allow the public through their mobile phone, just like you vote for the best singer on American Idol, you can watch something that's like Shark Tank, or you see some pitches and you say, I would like to invest $200 in that startup, and I want to have some equity in that. So obviously, regulators are looking at the risk that's involved. There's a big discussion about, I know how much I can risk and invest, and I want to make that determination for myself and not have the government tell me that I have to have a net value of over $1 million in order to be able to do that. Those are discussions that are happening, but that just opens up incredible investment. I've sat on conference calls where there are internet syndicates that are set up, basically portals, and this was with Israeli startups, and it was a conference call with global investors. They were going through the different startups that were investment opportunities, and with the click of the mouse, you were able to lock down some money. And so the technology is really opening up possibilities for investors.
Is that one follow-up? But we heard in the earlier panel that venture capitalists are not investing in San Diego as much as we want, and they aren't as coming here. Is the startup replacing that group?
Well, there's a lot of VC money in biotech. So we certainly, I think, rank very high in the amount of money that's coming in for that type of research and for that type of innovation. A lot of VCs, they like to have the entrepreneurs close to them. They want to have them come into their boardroom. They want to go and be able to visit them and connect them to their networks, primarily in Silicon Valley. But what we're starting to see is that this bridge from San Diego to Silicon Valley is a lot shorter than people envision, just like the bridge from San Diego to Tijuana. If you're having a development, iOS developers creating your app for a fraction of the cost in Tijuana versus what you might be looking for in other parts of the US, a lot of it is in your mind. And so we have one startup, for example, that was part of the Plug and Play program in San Diego. He came back, and there was one investor from the Bay Area that said, I will fund you if you move up to San Francisco because I need you close by. And again, that's what we hear time and time again, and that's why we lose a lot of that talent. But this particular entrepreneur said, nope, I'm not moving from San Diego. This is where I want to live. I have a family. This is the quality of life that I want. Frankly, it's easier to build a startup in San Diego because there isn't as much competition, where every developer is not looking to jump to the next Twitter. You have much more stable teams here in San Diego. And he told that investor, he said, look, if I were to move up there, I might have a condo in Mountain View. And I'm looking right now, doing a MapQuest. For me to get to your office, it would take me about 1 hour and 20 minutes. If you call me and you need me to be up there in 1 hour and 20 minutes, I will jump on a Southwest flight. I will do a Lyft or jump in a cab and get over to your office, and I will be there in 1 hour and 20 minutes. And so they tried that out, and the investor ended up funding him, and that entrepreneur stayed in San Diego. So I think that is something that is truly going to help. And we never want to say that our startups have to stay in San Diego. Obviously, if you're growing, you're going to open up offices, and we want you to expand to New York and Las Vegas, but we really don't want the talent to feel like they can't grow their businesses here.
To Jim, on the transportation thing, somebody brought up a question that I want to expand on. I'm worried about truck traffic coming from Mexico and having an impact on the freeways. And many of us driving on the freeways are, feel a little bit in danger with all these lines of 50 trucks all coming back and forth on the freeways. And I wonder whether the transportation system, the goods movement that you talked about, will be alleviated in the next 30 years, or whether it's just going to get worse.
Well, certainly, as I said before, we're not building a lot of new highways, but one of the new highways we are building is SR 11 to the new border crossing at Otay Mesa East, which will hopefully alleviate some of the traffic problems that exist in Otay Mesa. In terms of the highway system itself, there's going to always be a lot of truck traffic, and particularly along those 805, 125, 15 corridors that come up from Mexico. We have a lot of traffic. In fact, because San Diego doesn't have a lot of warehousing and space like that, some stuff is trucked from Mexico to warehouses in Riverside and LA, and then back down to San Diego. So there's one of the reasons our truck problems are as they are is we haven't developed a lot of commercial land, and hopefully Otay Mesa, which is one of the last remaining parts of San Diego that have a lot of commercially developable industrial space, will develop along those lines to help alleviate some of that traffic. But when we talk about safety, hopefully some of the information technology that we're seeing will improve safety of trucking. Somebody earlier mentioned to be driverless cars, and it's not just the driverless cars that could revolutionize the trucking industry as well, but there are certain types of driver assist technologies which can make trucking safer and really make our highways in general safer. And Sandag is working to try to incorporate those types of technologies into the plan that we're looking at.
I want to go to Alex, who says embrace density. Because we hear a lot of different things about we're urban, yet we have suburban parts of this county, and I'm not going to point out any single development or controversial development in any part of the county, but we all know that there are these projects that are up, and they're promoting walkable, office, mixed retail. And they're just, you know what, it's like not in my backyard. And I've heard everything from there are going to be more cars, so it comes to a transportation issue. You can't accommodate the traffic, to there's not enough public transportation. And maybe not in downtown San Diego and in Mission Valley, but certainly out in North County, that is an issue. So how do you tell these people to embrace density when I don't even have the infrastructure that may really make that work?
I had a feeling someone would ask me that question, and it is a very tough argument to make. I was on the 78 on Wednesday morning or Tuesday morning, and it really was a parking lot. Honest to God, for a minute and a half, I did not move. I think there was a traffic ahead. It's a difficult argument to make. My response is, what is a better solution at the same time? I revert back to some East Coast cities that have embraced density. We in downtown San Diego are actually imposing FAR minimums, and not to get too technical, but what it means is you're not allowed to develop your property without a significant amount of density. That doesn't work everywhere, and I'm not suggesting that in Poway or in Scripps Ranch, for example, and I have no reason why I picked those two places, that density is the answer. So please don't take that out of context. But what I am suggesting is let's pick some specific areas and let's make those as dense as possible so that the other areas are not urban sprawl. So we have very dense and very not dense areas to where the middle areas are not urban sprawl. So let's pick some areas, make them the best they can be so that other areas are not impacted.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of choice involved. Right now in San Diego, you really have a lot of single-family housing development that's car dependent, but you don't have a lot of choice if you want to live in the type of neighborhoods we're talking about. There are very few of them. Close to downtown, around Balboa Park. But once you get away from those, you don't have a lot of that. A lot of those dense choices to walkable, bikeable areas, and that is what we're seeing. People are desiring that, and what I would say to certainly people who live in areas that might be ripe for density is that the density is going to come whether you like it or not. It's just it depends on whether we do it the smartest, best way, where we protect our quality of life, or if we do it piecemeal and in a way that really doesn't. That ends up in a second best solution.
But I think that's kind of difficult because I can't remember which one of you, I know one of you talked about community plans, and that's what we're seeing now is here's our community plan, it hasn't been upgraded or it has been upgraded, and then things go to city council. Roger and I can probably talk about so many different cities where we've seen community plans try to enact some change and things just get voted down. I don't know if there's a question in that or not. I'm just saying that seems to be
well, I
the
think it's always easier to defeat a plan than it is to get one through. But it's a messy political process, and I think you have to get to the point where, right now I think these discussions in San Diego in particular are just starting. I haven't been here that long, but I think we're just now starting to understand the issues a little better, and hopefully we can communicate them a little better to the people who might be resistant to change, again, because change is coming whether we would prefer that or not.
It looks like Marnie wants to jump in.
Yeah, actually, maybe a little bit of history. If you think about San Diego's growth, it used to be sprawl-oriented, right? We'd get more and more outside. I think one of the catalysts for why we started to get more growth internally was a deal that we struck with the environmentalists around redevelopment, right? It became a way to target where growth would occur, right? And the public sector would invest, create the infrastructure necessary. The builders felt confident that they could develop there in a period of time because the planning, the EIR work, the neighborhood outreach had all been done, so they could convince themselves that they could meet their performance. Now you had to want to build what the redevelopment area was offering. You couldn't change it to whatever you wanted, but it was a brokerage deal. That allowed us to channel growth back into the incorporated areas, away and protect the environmentally sensitive areas. That unfortunate alignment that we were able to accomplish with redevelopment as a tool to accomplish that, and by the way, the reason that the cities were willing to do that, they received back something called tax increment financing, money in property taxes that otherwise would have gone to school districts were now given to local jurisdictions. Governor Brown thought that that was no longer a good deal, wanted to take the money, give it back to the school districts, and did away with redevelopment districts because you remove the financing ability for local jurisdictions to perform what needs to get done for development to occur in these redevelopment areas. So now we have a little bit of a problem. Where is future growth going to occur without a tool that allowed you to channel it into the areas called smart growth areas? So there's a little bit of a hurdle we need to get over here because we'll be back sooner than later bumping heads between environmentalists and the development community because, as you know, we talked about job growth, population growth, the requirement for housing. Some of the areas are expensive. I think we talked about $1 million houses or $3,200 rent for 1,000 square feet downtown. Pretty expensive. We talked about continuing to expand the visitor industry, low-paying jobs, a little disconnect there between what type of job growth we're proposing and the type of housing we got. That's going to put pressure on sprawl again, right? Because you can produce less costly houses further out. You can go to Southern Riverside, right, and get a house, and then that creates a transportation problem, right? Because we got a lot of people on our freeways going back and forth. So we need to get back to being able to channel growth back to the incorporated areas, solving a lot of those environmental issues that we have, creating smart growth areas that allows a transportation system, a public transportation system, to actually work. But we, as people, are going to have to do two things. First, you're going to have to change your preference from single family to multifamily, and we're in the process of doing that right now. And the second thing is you're going to have to get out of your car. Right? I mean, trips today in San Diego, about 3% of them are transit total. And that's going to have to go up by 5-fold in order for this to accomplish it. So part of the solution, right, isn't just, what is Sandag going to do for you? It's you, as the public, deciding that you need to do things differently than the way that you have done them so far. And I would say I'm encouraged, especially by the generations that are coming up, their ability to adapt to new ways of living are admirable. And I think that, so I'm sort of positive that I think that will occur. But the institutions need to be in place in order to accomplish that. And today we've got a little bit of a disconnect that we need to mend fences to allow that development to actually occur in a sustainable way inside these smart growth areas in order to be successful.
I wanted to turn to Gabby for a moment on, I don't know, whether our problems scare outsiders, venture capitalists and entrepreneurs and people who want to build businesses, or whether, relatively speaking, San Diego is in better shape than other hot spots of the United States, Austin, Silicon Valley, the North, Boston. I mean, give us a sense of how San Diego, you said it was #1 in startups, according to Forbes. And yet here we are battling each other in San Diego. Oh, woe is us, we can't solve anything, we have no money. So can you put us in perspective with the world and say, well, San Diego, don't be so down on yourself?
Absolutely, and it really is, like Marty was saying, it's a mindset. What I find is that there is a lot of grumbling locally in San Diego. I live in Rancho Bernardo, and there's, oh, you know, we don't want more people to come. Well, I have 2 young boys, and my husband and I don't want them to move away, so they need to have housing. They're not going to live with us forever, and we worry about what kind of educational institutions are going to be here for them. Are we going to solve this water crisis so that we don't get into it, you know, we're at the end of the pipe or at the end of the river? So what I find from people that are coming from other regions, they think San Diego is unbelievable. They're coming from Canada, they're coming from China, they're coming from Mexico, they're coming from Texas, from Colorado, from other parts, or from San Francisco. They can't believe how inexpensive it is here to live. They can't believe how easy it is to attract incredible engineering talent, and nobody will steal them away from you. And so again, I think it's the mindset, the difference between more of the locals that we just don't quite see how we're going to get there, or there's fear of change, but change is coming. There's no question about that, and it's just a matter of how are we going to plan for that? One of the problems that San Diego has, speaking of mindset, is that we do have a lot of global investors that buy homes here and they come here to vacation. Or you do have the early Google and Yahoo semiconductor entrepreneurs from the Bay Area that retire in Rancho Santa Fe. And so there's, you know, when I go to Hawaii or when I go to Cancun, I don't book startup meetings when I'm there. I'm not meeting with entrepreneurs. I go there to relax. And that happens a lot with San Diego, where you see a lot of those beachfront homes in Del Mar, La Jolla, or in Coronado. People are only there 2 times a year. And so we need to get these people into the mindset that San Diego is not just about relaxation. When you come, you need to take some business meetings here. There is so much for you to tour. I was in Iceland in October, and we very specifically toured the geothermal plants up in Akureyri, and we looked at in Reykjavik, the incredible startup community there. We went there for the ecotourism and for a lot of different reasons, but very specifically we wanted to explore what is happening there with a lot of the innovation, and literally got out there to the geothermal plants. People are interested in coming and looking at our water repurification facilities. How are we doing that in San Diego? So I think we need to really tap that, but it does end up being a mindset. And you can go on the negative side, or I'm with the panelists up here, where I think we go towards the positive.
Turning to the whole panel, I guess what strikes me about what you're saying today and what we're writing about in the news is it's all about the stadium and the convention center and all this political battle, and yet that seems like a sideshow to what we really should be doing. And I know Marnie's mentioned this in politically correct language about whether we should invest in convention centers versus port improvements, but would you all tell us what you think about this big debate that's looming over the $1 billion worth of convention and stadium projects versus the same amount of money for anything else, and whether we should just say, we're tired of listening to that, put that away, we want to talk about the real topics? Or is our local image so wrapped up in these sports and convention things that we won't let the bigger picture crowd out that discussion? So,
I'll start if that's okay. The one challenge with that question is life is not a zero-sum game. It's not if somebody wins, somebody loses. That's not how it works. The convention center and stadium are 2 very different subjects because the financing behind them, in my opinion, are 2 very different. The convention center is a phenomenal opportunity to bring more visitors to San Diego, and in my opinion, it could pay for itself, and I think it's phenomenal. That, in turn, would increase tourism, and as we discussed this morning, creates and it grows our economy. Stadium is a much more difficult argument to make, and I'm not prepared to make a public funding argument here now, or quite frankly, ever. It's a harder argument to make. Petco Park was a phenomenal public investment, and anybody who spoke against it, you cannot find them anywhere, in my opinion. I live across the street from Petco Park. I built buildings across the street from Petco Park. I'm living proof that the city's investment in that facility has paid us back well above any investment. I'm not prepared to make the same argument for a Charger stadium, but I'm saying people need to be open-minded to it and walk away from the idea of it's a zero-sum game.
And if I can jump in really quickly, because I think I'm on the opposite side. I really liked what I heard. You are what you invest in. And I frankly don't hear the startups asking for a stadium or for football. And a lot of sports fans, absolutely. My husband played football in high school. His roommate at Villanova was a football player. But I think when you look at the economics and where the future is truly going to be, I just don't hear, I personally just don't see that. I'm not going to speak for every startup, every entrepreneur. We do have a lot of fans. But I absolutely do see how education has been gutted. I'm on the foundation of my son's elementary school in the Poway School District, one of the best school districts in the country, arguably. But the investments do need to be made in education across the entire region, because that is where we're going to create these jobs. That is where we're going to really build the future of the region. And for a lot of the people that are attracted in tourism that come to San Diego, I think there was a study that was released last year that found that the action sports and the endurance sports, the triathlons, they brought in more money than Petco Park did. Something like $60 million versus, I don't know what the annual get is for Petco Park. I think it's something in the 30 millions. And that is just something that we hadn't studied before. We hadn't really seen. It's kind of spread out. People don't necessarily go to the side of the street and cheer on, the triathlete that's jogging or that's riding their bikes. But that's something that I think we need to study. And I've talked with a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs that say the type of talent that they get in San Diego, because there's a certain personality that demands to live in a climate where you can be a triathlete like that. The competitive nature of getting out and swimming from one end of La Jolla to the other end is the type of competitive nature for men and women that you want in your startup, because they are going to be successful no matter what it takes. So there's different things I think that we can invest in that are going to also create healthier communities. I happen to have two neurologists, two brothers-in-law in the family, and so we really do have to look at the impact with some of these brain injuries. And the future generation, parents are not putting their children in football. And so I think it does have to be a long-term investment. Where are we going to put that money? Now, if it goes to a vote, by all means, crunch the numbers if it pencils out. If it's something that a majority of people want to invest in, then we'll certainly see. But that's certainly my take.
I think the story on the ballpark downtown is a little more colorful than was described. There was still $400 million plus that the city of San Diego put into that. It gave away development rights and it gave away naming rights. And actually, that Larry Lucchino model that he brought from the Orioles in Camden Park worked well. It was a concept where if you provide a developer with sufficient ability to make a profit, meaning the development rights around the downtown area and the naming rights, that's the attractiveness, not the ballpark. The ballpark does not add a dime in terms of economic benefit to the region, but it is a huge attractor. It determines where growth will occur. Everybody wants to be around it. Now, that office building that's built or that hotel that was built there, the demand was already in the region. Question is where it was going to locate. The city took $400 million, plunked it down at the stadium to buy that location. And at the time it made sense. Remember redevelopment, they got the property tax revenue back from tax increment finance. So it made sense to them to be able to do that and to get the ballpark down there, right? It had to first invest that $400 million. Now hindsight being what it is, the city of San Diego is having budget problems. They've had budget problems for a long time now. To argue that they had $400 million available to spend on that, I think in hindsight is probably wrong. I mean, you take a look at it, no one wanted to go what Jerry Sanders had to go through as the mayor there, cutting jobs and cutting services to people all along because they didn't have enough money. Where was the $400 million? And when you think about what they did to their own pension system in terms of stop paying it into it, right, in order to free up the funds so it could make those kinds of investments, those are not the wrong kinds of decisions. Those are the wrong kinds of decisions. So the stadium has a little more lively, I think, background to it than to say it looks good today and it looks successful, but it's like making sausage, right? It was really ugly during the process when it was put together. Now, I think the next point about paying for itself, one of the things the point I've tried to make here today is that when you take a look at building infrastructure like a convention center, there's more than just the transit occupancy tax that you should be looking at, right? It's where are those people who are going to work there going to live, and how are they going to be able to afford to do that? And we've got $1 million and very expensive units downtown where this convention center is going to be located. So then do we build affordable housing or do we subsidize the wages? And none of those are included into the cost of the convention center. So it by itself is, again, if you holistically look at it, it doesn't pay for itself at all. On the surface, it looks like it does, right? Because all of the hotel rooms are paid up, the transient occupancy tax received back. But the problem is we're shoveling it out the back door faster than it's coming in the front door. So again, I'm not arguing against the visitor industry. I'm arguing about balance, right? And today, I would argue that given that we have a vote coming up in front of the city of San Diego about a minimum wage, I'm arguing that we're a little out of balance right now, right? We've got a few too many low-paying jobs being created, and yet we're back asking the public potentially to build more of that infrastructure that supplies the foundation for more low-paying jobs without a concept about how those people are going to either move up the ladder or move out of that industry and be sustainable here in the region. It's that balance question that I struggle with, and I would indict the business community to come up with a potential solution as opposed to just a strategy. They're against something, but let's hear about what they're for. And I think that's important. It's too bad Mark walked away, but I'm sure he had an answer.
Ryan, do you want to?
And Jim?
Do you guys want to weigh in on this?
No, I think Marnie said it really well.
Ryan? No?
Ditto, right?
I do, though, have to stress that bridge is education. There's no question about it. And there are some recent studies that have been looked at of what does it take to become an entrepreneur, or what is it that truly launches somebody into entrepreneurship. A lot of people think it's an attitude towards risk or it's a drive. You know, the number one reason is an inheritance or a gift, a large financial gift. And that is only available to a certain sector of our society. So when you do look at the kids, I was a mentor for many years through the Barrio Logan College Institute. There was no grandfather to give a large gift to some of these girls that I was mentoring. You know, there was no inheritance. And so the only path was going to be education to really get into the right job. And then a lot of the successful entrepreneurs that we see have worked at the Lending Club founder, I think, came out of Oracle. You see a lot of the successful startups, they launch once they've spent some time working at Qualcomm. You have to have your master's and your PhD. You have to have those opportunities. And so that, to me, is where the investment has to be for San Diego's opportunities.
One point about education, which I agree with completely. I think the Obama administration has an interesting concept about community colleges. Today, you know, the public pays K through 12. But I think the point he's making is that, look, K through 12 is not enough anymore. It's K through 14. And so we got to step up as society and say that K through 12 is an inadequate education to survive in today's economy. And so we need to make what was called elementary education, K through 12. We need to extend it to K through 14. So if we choose to do that, right, in light of the demands in the marketplace, then when you graduate from high school, it's not, okay, what do I do next and how do I apply to a four-year school, but instead you've got 2 more to go before you're ever moved to a 4-year school. Now, this is probably going to change the way we think about educating people and what's required, but in light of the marketplace, that's probably warranted to refresh our look at that, to determine what does put people in position so they will be sustainable in the long run.
I'm going to switch gears to one last little topic that's near and dear to all of our hearts, because we see it every day when we go fill up at the pump. The gas price has gone down quite a bit. And again, I can't remember, but within these presentations, people talked about, you know, oil price going down. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. So I kind of wanted the whole panel to kind of give me their take on oil. Like, is it like the best thing in the world that it's going down? And I don't know where the bottom is on it. What are the consequences of what we're seeing now in that marketplace? Ryan, I'm going to pick on you because I want you to.
Obviously, a lower oil price is a good thing if you're coming at it from the I'm a consumer of it. It's a bad thing if you are a producer of it. So, you know, we hear a lot about how well the Texas economy has been doing. We're hearing less of that recently. I think the thing I'm concerned about, I mean, I've seen a lot of studies trying to unpack how much of this is just weak demand because outside of the U.S., a lot of economies are slowing down, and I think that's, by some measures, up to half of the driving behind the decrease in oil prices. But I do think my concern is in recent years we'd seen a lot of innovation in the U.S. based on high oil prices in terms of cars that get higher miles per gallon, sources of domestic oil that are profitable once the price per barrel goes above a certain level. And I'm a little bit worried that a lot of that innovation, which I think is all a net good, both from job creation, quality environment, et cetera, that some of that is just going to be squeezed out because of lower oil prices. I'll stop there. But.
Maybe a couple points. One, I actually think the price of oil is too high. It's controlled by oligopolists as opposed to a market rate. And we're seeing it fall today. So does it make sense to send economic resources to an overpriced resource? No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense to pay more for oil than what it actually costs and what it would cost in an openly competitive marketplace. So I think this is a great story where the United States comes up with a technology. Forget about what the technology is bringing out of the ground, which is the controversial part, but a technology that lowers the price and increases the supply of something, and everybody can afford it. I mean, that's entrepreneurship, right, at its heart. That is exactly what needs to occur in many other areas where the price is actually lower, right, because then we can afford more, right, with the same amount or less money. That's a good story. But it's been controlled for so long. So I don't think the price of oil falling is a bad thing. It's a good thing. It needs to fall back down to a place where it really belongs. What's the actual cost? And then some amount of reasonable profit on top of it. That's not even close to where it is today because it's actually controlled by an oligopoly. So I think the United States is the white hat here. Now, unfortunately, we've got greenhouse gas issues. And so it's half black, half white. But to the world, you know, lower oil prices are probably going to help Europe out. I mean, they have to import all of their oil, and they have substantial problems over there. So lowering the price of oil in Europe, where as opposed to sending their money outside of Europe as they've spent it, will stay in Europe. That's good. That's a good thing. It'll help stabilize the country. The greenhouse gas emission thing, I think, needs to be solved on personal choices as opposed to raising the price of the resource. We all know this is bad. We talked about it before. Are you willing to give up your single-family house and live in a smaller one, or are you willing to make public transportation? These are personal choices, right, that we all make. So I think part of this greenhouse gas thing, we're using oil as a deflection. It's us. We're making the choice, right? And so if we change that choice, we also can make inroads on greenhouse gas emissions because it really is transportation, right, in a great sense, as well as energy production, that is responsible for a lot of this. Now, the hard part is greenhouse gas emissions are global, right, and there's a lot of countries that are emerging into what we hope will be middle-class status, and they're using technologies such as coal and other things like that, which are having horrendous impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. But we need to step forward as a country, make behavioral decisions, and lower those greenhouse gases locally. Maybe some of that behavioral change will filter to technology improvements that will also be transferable to these emerging countries that are coming into middle-class status like China and India, where this battleground over greenhouse gas emissions will actually occur.
Yeah, I would say that Ryan makes a very good point that we, in the midst of falling energy prices, we don't want to lose that innovation drive that we have towards cleaner, more efficient use of energy. You hear a lot, it's been mentioned recently that as these gas prices have fallen, people have started to buy SUVs. Well, that's basically a bet that the gas prices are going to stay really low for the next 10 years. When you make a long-term decision based on short-term conditions, that's not a really good way to be thinking. And the same is true when we talk about that innovation. When we make long-term decisions about how we're going to achieve energy balance and reduce greenhouse gases in the future, we don't want to be making them on the basis of short-term costs like oil. And oil, I mean, falling oil is great if you live in San Diego and most of the rest of the United States. It's not so good if you're in Venezuela or Russia or North Dakota. So it really depends on your perspective, but I think the point is we don't want to be making long-term decisions based on a short-term market condition.
I can't say I have much more to add to that.
I'll say one thing, though. We are all investors in the sense that we do shape our future based on the individual actions that we take. And it really does come down to all of us with regard to greenhouse gases. I will make a pledge to take the rapid. You know, that infrastructure has been put into place, and I still drive in my minivan down to downtown San Diego and back, and then back again into Carlsbad. Although I know the rapid is there, I can be tweeting and you know, doing some emailing while I'm there. So I think that is incumbent upon all of us. All of us are going to help the region become better based on these individual actions.
Well, in a year, we'll ask you who took the BRT once in the year.
Exactly.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up. I mean, one of the big takeaways from this for me was it's all personal. There's a lot of personal decision to be made, and the car is just one thing, because I'm sorry, I grew up in the Midwest. We drive everywhere. And I just don't think the train station is close enough for me to drop my car off. But not only with that, but I think in other lifestyle choices, like, are you willing to downsize and go into a smaller house or a condo? And again, hey, I'm there, but there's no supply. So to me, there's a chicken and an egg thing going on here, and it'll be interesting to see how this issue plays out in San Diego County, the growth and development. But I want to just take this time to first thank you guys for sticking with us. I appreciate it. I know it's a long morning. And I want to thank our panelists for hanging in there. Great job. Just want to say thanks. And also a couple of shout outs, and Roger's going to help me with these. I make him do it.
Well, these roundtables don't happen by themselves magically out of the thin air. It takes a lot of people to make them happen. So we want to thank the University of San Diego, Liz Harmon, Tracy Hong, Michelle Malian, Rosemary DeGracia, Tutsi McGowan, Carl Smith at the San Diego Workforce Partnership, Tina No Bartel, Heather Milne Barger, Janelle Foskett, Kelly Ring, and Desiree Routen. And we hope that you all go online and download all these PowerPoints that you all are going to be posting, and hope that you come back and join us for the 32nd annual roundtable next year.